Good morning. This is Dan Ozersmeer, Chair of the BET. This morning we are doing our special meeting to consider the American Rescue Plan grant proposal from the First Selectman. This proposal has gone through an advisory committee, gone through our budget committee last week, and it was recommended to the full BET. We had a first read of this proposal Thursday night at the BET, and today is our second read, and we will vote on and act on it. I'd like to start the meeting with Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, can I ask someone to move the item?
I would move the item.
Second.
Jeff Raymer and Leslie Talkington second. Thank you. Any objections? See no.
We're not moving the item to the minute. You don't need it.
No, understood. Okay. Oh, no, I apologize. You're right. By the way, Leslie, thanks for catching that, because the other 11 of us were ready to go to breakfast. Thank you very much. Okay. I believe the first item, and what I'm referring to is this one page that lists the items in order, is the Affordable Housing Trust. This is an allocation of $1.1 million to that trust. And there are many questions on this, and we do have Amin Ahmad from our town legal with us to help us with this. So can I start with discussion?
Not attempted to discuss the act generally, but only to offer at the outset what will be my motion to adjourn, to amend, if seconded, to amend the dollar amount back to the 1.8 that it was in the original draft.
Was that a motion?
That was a motion.
Discussion?
You get second first.
Yes. Stephen, you second?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
If I can make a suggestion, I'm thinking now for a moment I should have waited a little bit longer. Normally in Robert's rules, once there's a motion to amend, then the discussion is supposed to be limited to the amendment, and I think that's a discourtesy. I think actually it would be better, if I may be so bold, it would be better that the body have a discussion about the act generally, and then, if appropriate, take up my motion later. But I think my motion shouldn't preempt the discussion. I'm going to leave my motion out there, but I make a request of the chair that you resume with the discussion of the act generally and come back to my motion at the appropriate time.
Okay. And Leslie, you seconded that? Is that okay? Yeah. Oh, okay, fine. Thank you. So general discussion on the item Affordable Housing Trust.
Thanks, Dan. So when I step back for a second and look at the intent of the ARP Act law, it's really to address those individuals who were negatively impacted by the COVID and pandemic, individuals and businesses and other services. And we as a community were really, came through the came through the pandemic pretty well. The town's financials were sustained. We did not have a negative impact from the financials. I think individual pockets of our residents were impacted. Our businesses, there were some businesses that closed. So when I think about the use of the ARP Act funds in general, we have an opportunity here. It's a one-time opportunity. I don't think this kind of legislation will be passed again. Hopefully, there won't be another pandemic to cause the need. But it's a one-time opportunity to really take these funds and use them to benefit those areas that we may not typically address in our budget, and to try and raise all of our residents up to a higher level. I look in general at what the allocation suggestions are in the ARP Act, and we're really not doing a lot of that in the budget. But the Affordable Housing Trust, the donation to the trust, is one area where we really are benefiting residents that have housing requirements and housing needs. It also will do, I think, benefit the town as we try and address some of the proposals in front of P&Z right now. It also will do, I think, benefit the town as we try and address some of the proposals in front of P&Z right now. It also will do, I think, benefit the town as we try and address some of the proposals in front of P&Z right now. It also will do, I think, benefit the town as we try and address some of the proposals. I don't think so. I don't think it's on yours.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay, so sorry for that distraction. But the affordable housing is one area which really does benefit residents who may have been negatively impacted. I think that Greenwich has indicated that we want to locally address the affordable housing main needs. Has indicated that we want to locally address the affordable housing main needs. We have a ghost. Has indicated that we want to locally address the affordable housing main needs. We have a ghost. Has indicated that we want to locally address the affordable housing main needs. Okay.
Great job, Leslie.
Certainly, so I no longer know whether, I guess we still are live streamed over YouTube, and the Zoom link is working. I support a donation to the Affordable Housing Trust. I think it benefits the town, certainly with our conversations with Hartford on legislation and our conversations with individual projects that are before P&Z right now. I know that there is some concern that the limitations and the eligibility requirements within the ARP Act may cause some issues for the trust to function and for our boards to be comfortable that they will end up being eligible expenses. However, I think we can accommodate that and try and limit any exposure by some conditions that I will propose later when it's appropriate. But as far as the allocation for the housing trust, I think it's a really important effort for the town. It will work together with what P&Z is attempting to do. The kinds of conditions that I'm talking about are that the majority of funds will remain in the grant fund and only released to the trust when the conditions are met. I believe there's a question about the first $300,000, and we can ask Ms. Ahmad to comment on that in a little bit. But also that the allocations, the conditions, are really about the use that they're eligible per the American Rescue Plan Act final rule, and that the commitments are made within the necessary time frame. And I think with those conditions in place, this board should be comfortable that we can make some progress in this area.
Any other? Oh, Jeff Raymer?
So I'd like to be just a touch more emphatic on a basic point that Mrs. Moriarty was addressing. The act was intended as a response to the ravages on Americans as a result of COVID, the pandemic. And the act is very clear that the purpose of the act, their words, not mine, is to restore economic equity. And we're supposed to do so in the application of these funds, and again quoting, by a related and reasonably proportional response to the impact of the pandemic. We're supposed to be looking out and seeing where the pandemic had its impact, and we're supposed to be applying funds there. If you take a look at the distribution as it exists right now, that is to say, without my motion, the distribution right now is to apply 1.1 to affordable housing. Let me back up for a moment. If I try and make a division in our distribution of how much of our distribution is intended to give mill rate relief to our citizens, either in the current year or in future years, and weigh that on one side as opposed to weighing on the other side, what funds are we using to actually try and ameliorate or relieve the impact of COVID on our citizens other than just by tax abatement? If I try and make that division, then on the side that is aid to our citizens, it would at best appear to be the following items. 1.1 million for affordable housing. Human Services is getting 859,000. The nonprofits are getting, in the aggregate, 1.3 million. The health department is being given some additional personnel, but I'll pretend for a moment that that's not mill rate relief. That's intended to be pure COVID. That's $270,000. And then even the administration fees, the $100,000 at the end, I'll pretend that that isn't mill rate relief, that that's really COVID relief. All of those together total 3.7. That means that we're applying more or less 11% of the COVID money to relief of our citizens, 11% to what was in fact the explicit design purposes of the act. 88%, 88 and a fraction percent, is all the other items which are pure mill rate relief, most of them in the near future years, but some of it in the current year. So who are we benefiting here? The nurses' aides, the grocery clerks, the cleaning crews, the janitors, our workforce, these people, for the most part, are not receiving the benefit of that. Tax abatement for them is either doesn't apply to them at all, or at least it's a very small sum. The great majority of the relief are to the people who are taxed the most heavily. It means that the largest, most grandiose houses, those are the people who are getting the lion's share of the tax relief. Is that really the allocation that we think is appropriate in light of the act? Because if that's our view, then in my view, I think it's shame on us. And that is at least in part, in the major part, the reason that I made the motion that I made that we'll address at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Laura?
Thank you. In the prior term, Mr. Mason and I served as BET liaisons to the Affordable Housing Task Force for a period of time. And during that process, we got a primer, if you will, on the issues in our town. And I wholly support this $1.1 million going towards this effort. At the time we were going to those meetings, the Affordable Housing Trust was an idea that over several months was galvanized and recently passed by the RTM. And this month, or in April, they'll be voting on the composition of the Affordable Housing Trust. There are a couple questions about eligibility and timing, but I'm confident we could address these with conditions, and I thank Amina for being here to share with us her guidance on that. But the end of the day, if we're going to have any hope of doing a local solution, that we are faced with all these development projects that our residents are crying out for relief, this is the tool that we need to deploy. This is the tool we have right now in our toolbox that we know we can use. And I think we'd be foolish to try and hamstring it in any way other than just basic good governance. So I wholly support this moving forward with conditions that ensure that the projects are eligible and that they will be encumbered and spent as the legislation outlines. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, discussion? Leslie?
So while I wholly support the affordable housing aspect of these allocation of funds, it was always my preference that these funds be dedicated to Greenwich communities, the former Greenwich Housing Authority, which I think has done an excellent job in terms of providing units of housing here. Also, when you look at the definitions of eligible, one has to remember that the housing in Greenwich is very expensive, and limiting, the expenses as it defines here to 30% of someone's income, I think that we'd find that there are many other residents in the town of Greenwich that actually spend more than 30% once all of the elements of the housing are included, including their, mortgage payments, their property taxes, their utilities are included, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that many people have felt the impact of COVID on their budgets and of all income levels. And I do think allocating these funds, which are really a blessing to the town of Greenwich, to help all of our taxpayers is of benefit to everyone. But again, I would have preferred an allocation, which I don't see here, for Greenwich communities. Greenwich communities. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Greenwich Housing Authority, Greenwich communities. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Karen, thank you.
With respect to the AHA trust, the allocation to the trust, I feel that this is a slippery slope. I would remind this body that when the trust was being presented, it was being funded with no public funds. And that was at the same time an application was made for monies from ARP. My understanding is the next step from the commissioner will be a request to abate taxes of developers. Talk about a slippery slope. Now, I have no issue with the trust, but I do have a problem with the representations made by P&Z on how it would be funded. These are taxpayer funds, and we need a better plan than just trust me. Once we give money this year with ARP, will there be additional requests of our taxpayers outside of ARP? I don't have a plan from the P&Z commissioner, and I don't understand what is going to be done with these funds. I would rather see these monies go to Greenwich communities who have a direct impact to our community, and the monies that will be used will directly affect our affordable housing stock, not 80%, 20%, or 80%, 40%, or whatever the formula is. By using these monies, we are never going to achieve the goal that is set out for us of 10%. With respect to Mr. Raymer's contention about mill rate reduction, the projects proposed impact Byram, Pembroke, and Coscob. Many of these were negatively impacted by flooding and are vulnerable citizens who literally were left, in some cases, homeless after this occurrence. What better use of these funds for these vulnerable citizens? Other communities have used ARP money for infrastructure. Why shouldn't we? Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Drake.
And actually, I was pointing at David.
David, thank you.
So there are signs we've all seen all over the community that say, I don't know who put these signs up, that say affordable housing, yes, local excess density, no, something to that effect. The wisdom of the Affordable Housing Trust is that there's two wisdoms here, maybe more, but the one is that by virtue of appropriating money via the ARP or otherwise, the town is able to benefit from a standard that is the county standard rather than the state standard, and therefore enable us to meet more of the affordable housing needs with much less density than would otherwise be the case. If we were adhering to the state standard, it would mean higher density, and also enables us to more realistically define affordable housing to include that population that we know and would want very much to be able to live in Greenwich, teachers and so forth, that otherwise might not be included within the definition of affordable housing. We have this 830G debate that's all over the community. Whether we like it or not, the remainder of the state has more votes up in Hartford than we do. And to the extent that we're able to chip away at the 10% in a way that continues to enable local control at a higher rental benchmark than would otherwise be the case, strikes me as very, very intelligent, very, very intelligent. I was taken by the comments last night by the head of the P&Z as well as by Mr. Finger highlighting those points. So I'm a very wholehearted supporter of the 1.1 million. I also think that Mr. Finger noted that the ability to use these funds well within the benchmarks of the timeframe set forth by the ARP give me comfort that we are able to execute within the requirements of the ARP. And finally, at the RTM, my recollection is that Greenwich Communities was a very vocal supporter of the Affordable Housing Trust. They spoke out and they support this initiative wholeheartedly. So for all of those reasons, I very much support the 1.1 million appropriation.
Thank you. Bill Drake?
I too support the 1.1 million appropriation. I think, as usual, Laura Erickson said it perfectly. I won't repeat what she said, but this is a step we can take right now with real effects. And the testimony of Margarita and the statement of need that's in this document, or in the other document, is just completely convincing to anyone who reads it how this will work successfully to achieve the goals that I think we all share. So it deserves our support. And Leslie, you started to think through a couple of clauses for a condition. It would be useful, I think, or please elaborate it or speak it up so that we may break here for a caucus, but it'd be useful in our caucus to have in front of us what you're proposing so we can consider it, thoroughly and well.
Yes.
So the condition that I would propose, and I'll put one caveat because there's a piece of information we would need from Ms. Ahmad, but to condition the funds upon there'll be two parts of the condition. Number one, confirmation that the use of funds are eligible per the American Rescue Plan Act final rule. And the second one, and I can email this to members so that you have it when we break for caucus. And two, funds that will not be committed by December 31, 2024 are returned to the ARP Act grant fund, or I'll clarify this, are returned to the ARP Act grant fund for allocation for a different use, with such notice being given to the BET by August 31, 2024. And I'll explain, if I can explain that. So the first one is clearly the onus would be on the trust with what other outside advice they get to confirm that their transactions are eligible, because it's a complicated formula within both defining the eligible users and whatever vehicle they use to make these donations, be it loans or grants or whatever it is. And the second being that if they're not committed by 2024 or expected to be expended by 2026, the town is obligated to return the funds to the government, whereas we can probably reallocate them. So to ask the trust to be our partners, whatever they have not been able to execute, will release so that this body has time to identify an additional use, and there's time to go through the RTM process for their approval. So that's why the August 31 date is in there. The question, can Can I refer the question to Ms. Ahmad? So in the Declaration of Trust, it talks about a $300,000 threshold initial funding before the trust can function in generating and creating transactions with developers. Because of the time frame, and I know they may have other sources of funds, we want to get them started so that they can use these funds appropriately. The intent here was to keep the 1.1 million available to be returned. Once funds are given to the trust, I believe the trust right now doesn't have the ability to give them back to the town. And there are two ways to handle that. One is we give them the 300,000, which would like to be subject to these same conditions, but that would require the Declaration of Trust be modified so that the trust can return ARP funds to the town in case they can't spend it in time or don't meet the qualifications. The second way would be that the 1.1 remains with the town. It's appropriated for them and would be released when they can function. But the question is whether that second alternative, that the town keeps a 1.1 in the grant fund allocated to the trust, does the trust have the ability and the right, the authority to negotiate transactions to the point of being able to execute documents without money in their account? And I don't know whether you have a view on that.
Yes, sure. So the key document here is the Declaration of Trust, and the ordinance also mirrors some of the main points that need to be addressed when you're conditioning the allocation here. So the 300,000 is a threshold where the declaration and the ordinance both say that once the fund has, for the first time, reached a level of 300,000 and all other conditions have been met, the board shall accept on a continuous basis requests for funds from eligible parties. So, Ms. Moriarty, I think the question there you had is if the BET were to take 300,000 and actually transfer it to the fund, what does that do in terms of the town's ability to get the money back if the trust is unable to meet the requirements for ARPA within the deadlines that have been put out in the final rule? So I believe that was one question that you asked. And the other question has to do with if you were to condition the entire amount and not transfer 300,000 into the fund, then what does the trust board have the ability to do in terms of accepting applications for eligible uses? So I believe those are the two questions that you have asked. Looking at the language in the Declaration of Trust where it says once the fund has for the first time reached $300,000, I think the more conservative reading or a strict reading of that language suggests that the fund itself needs to have $300,000 specifically segregated and in the bank, so to speak, for the trust board to then go ahead and start taking in applications. So I would suggest that would be the more strict approach, because the remainder of the declaration also talks about the controller's ability, or actually requires the controller to segregate and account for separately any monies that are actually in the fund. So you're actually talking about a separate account. So in order for $300,000 to be, for the fund to have reached $300,000, I believe the fund actually needs to have $300,000 segregated and set aside. Now, the other part of the question was if you actually transferred $300,000 into the fund, if the requirements are not met under ARPA within the time frame, then does the town have the ability to ask for that money back? And to respond to that question, there is language here in the declaration which specifically says, and this is section 11, subsection 5, the declaration reads, "No monies held in the trust, including interest and dividends earned, shall be transferred to any other account within the town's operating or capital budgets, except as provided in the next section, which talks about in the event of the termination of the trust, then the monies can be transferred back to the town." So that creates a situation, given the language as it appears now in the declaration, that if the trustees are not able to allocate the money in accordance with the final rule within the deadlines, then that language would make it difficult for the town to then ask for the money back. And as you know, we've had some discussions with some of the folks who were involved in drafting some of the trust language, including Mr. Barilak. And one suggestion was we could make a amendment to that language so that you have a carve-out specifically for ARPA funds and give the town the ability to get the money back if the final rule requirements are not met. So that's one option. The other option would be to keep the money for the ARPA funds within the town's grant funds, but then the issue becomes if there's not yet $300,000 in the fund itself, then are you somehow preventing the trust board from then going out and seeking applications? So that.
Thank you. Can I just?
Can
Yes.
I ask a follow-up? If we want to condition the entire 1.1 million, but we direct our comptroller to only transfer 300,000 into the trust to keep the other 800,000 in that grant fund, can we put 300,000 of conditioned funds into the trust? Is that permitted, or do the funds need to go into the trust with no condition on them? Is there any limitation in that?
So what you're suggesting, I think, is transfer $300,000 into the fund, but those 300,000 would also have some conditions under the final rule. I don't think that would be a good approach, because once you've transferred the money into the trust, it belongs to the trust. And so adding additional conditions, you still have the problem of trying to get the money back.
If the declaration, I mean, some of this may, to use the word trust, require trust, but we would want to see the declaration of trust modified to allow the trust board to return the unused ARP fund back to the town if they're not able to be used within the criteria by the ARP Act. And there seems to be no resistance to that certainly from the people who devised the trust. We'd have to get the RTM to agree to that. Right. We would want to have confidence that that 300,000 that's being transferred is being considered and would follow the condition, really, that we're putting on the entire amount of the money. And I'm trying to look for a vehicle to be able to do that.
Right. So, and I think you would want to do that under the final rule so that the town isn't on the hook at the end of the day if the money is spent, on uses that may not strictly qualify under the final rule.
David?
So let me understand. The two questions. One is the conditions of the statute of ARPA. Once we've given the money to ARPA, ARPA is responsible to adhere to those conditions, and the trust or is that correct? There's no, the town has no exposure in the sense that it's really the requirement of the trust board and its advisors and so forth to adhere to the conditions of ARPA.
Absolutely, and I think you can certainly condition that, saying you have to meet the requirements, but I'm not sure if you're talking about the 300,000 or the full amount.
I'm just, regardless of whether it's
Right.
300.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So if that's the case, then the risk, let's say we simply transferred the 300,000 and took a risk. And the risk is we had our, board member yesterday, Mr. Finger, saying, if I have the notes right, that the 1.1 million would be used within a year, the actual funding with the actual funding within 1 year to 18 months. That's for the 1.1. And so, the real question is, what's the real risk that the 300,000 is not going to be utilized within the period of the ARPA, time frame? And I think it's very low from a practical perspective. So therefore, assuming the board, the BET, were willing to accept that risk, I don't know if they are, then you could really just give the 300,000 without the condition, and the remaining amount could be conditioned as we wish, relating to, that the project has to be, we're taking a risk on 300,000 when they've already expressed in a public forum that the whole $1.1 million is going to be readily used within a year or 18 months. Am I getting it right?
I think that becomes really more of a policy decision for this board.
Yeah.
But you want to be sure that at the end of the day, that those funds get spent in accordance with the final rule.
But the worst case scenario is if the judgment of the folks who testified yesterday are wrong, really misplaced, then we would have lost, if you will, 300,000 of capability. And the question, to me, from a practical perspective, it seems remote, because the credibility of it would really reflect very poorly on the Affordable Housing Trust, and the credibility and sustainability of that entity would be impaired if they were unable to utilize it. I just, practically speaking, can't imagine that wouldn't occur. I'm comfortable with that because I think they'd be highly motivated to have it work, and they've already expressed that the whole $1.1 million will work. So therefore, it's not a risk that I think is significant, at least to me.
Just one thing, I think there's 2 or 3 people that want to speak on this topic, but I, for one, will say I certainly completely trust our colleagues in P&Z that work on the Affordable Housing Trust, et cetera. However, this is a finance and fiduciary board. If we provide funds to the Affordable Housing Trust, our assurance that not only will those projects go to projects that qualify under ARP, not just ARP. Qualify under ARP, not just Affordable Housing Trust statute regulations. But we need to be completely assured that, in fact, those funds, including auditing and including the accountability of the people that use those funds, are completely fulfill all the requirements that Treasury will require of the town of Greenwich. These funds are coming to the town of Greenwich, then they would be going to the Affordable Housing Trust. The Affordable Housing Trust, I'm not sure if it requires board resolutions or what kind of documents need to pass between that trust and the town of Greenwich. Those need to be completely airtight, that is their responsibility. In return, we need to know that the documents they have with the developers reflect that same requirement. This is completely a pass-through activity, And certainly, I think Leslie had a great start on the conditions. But to me, it isn't just a question of when they propose a project and accept that it's eligible within ARP. There has to be much more plumbing to assure that there is no chance. We trust them, but this is a fiduciary situation. We need to, whatever conditions we have to go well beyond that. So with that, just kind of comment from me, I think it was Karen and then Jeff and then Leslie. Is that okay?
There's a fundamental mistake here. Let me just read from the rule because the overview is a little glossy, and the overview that was published is not the rule. The rule is the rule, as is published in the Federal Register. And as to the idea of we can lay delegate the responsibilities to the trust, let me be very clear that the rule, and I'm reading from it, says a nonprofit entity that receives a transfer from a recipient, the recipient is us, the nonprofit entity is the trust, is a subrecipient. A nonprofit subrecipient may only receive funds to carry out an eligible use and must comply with any reporting and compliance requirements. Note that recipients, us, remain ultimately responsible for the reporting of information and for the compliance and must collect any and all necessary information from their subrecipients to complete the required reporting. We remain on the hook. If you transfer the funds to the trust and the trust with the best of intentions does not obey the rule, we are responsible for the clawback. If those funds have been expended, the trust no longer has the funds. And with all their red face and apology, the funds are going to come out of our pocket for the non-compliance. And so it's important to us that we comply. And let me show you some of the hazards that are lurking out there. So, for example, we received an email this morning from one of the members of the trust group opining that we can make loans to anybody whose income level is at 65% of the area median income. That's not what the rule says. The rule says that you can make affordable housing provision available for people who qualify as being of low income, which is defined as 40% of the area median income, and they define area median to be for the whole county of Fairfield, not Greenwich or something, or alternatively at 185% of the poverty guidelines for that year for a family of that size. I have no idea what any of those numbers would compute to, but that's the requirement. That's a different requirement than is in the email that we received this morning. It's a different requirement than the 30% of somebody, 30% of the income of somebody who's earning 80% of the Stamford-Norwalk area. I don't know what that number is either, but it's a different measure. And it's also a different measure than the measure that's being used in 830G. And I can understand well-intended people could easily be confused about this, but we need to be very careful to be sure that we lay out clearly they have to comply with the following guidelines because we're on the hook for it afterward, and when the funds have been misapplied, there ain't nobody out there who's going to be able to reimburse the money that we're going to have to pay to the feds on a clawback if it happens. And if you think that's remote, because I once got an email from one of the members of this trust group saying that the chance that in the Biden administration that they'd ever do a clawback doesn't exist. On the contrary, at the very same moment I was getting that email, we were looking at a $90,000 clawback on that elevated house down on Ledge Road in Old Greenwich where there was a non-compliance and was astonished that the auditor went so far as to look at the building department records. I mean, these people are capable of doing very detailed audits. So I'm very much in favor of these funds, but I'm also very much in favor of a little caution. And there are, I think, at least 4 areas in which there needs to be condition. Number one, in compliance with the Act, these funds have to be fully obligated by the end of 2024. That has to be a condition. Number two, the funds have to be fully remitted by the end of 2026. That has to be a condition. The funds have to go to people who are the eligible beneficiaries in accordance with that long, boring monologue I just did. Be sure that there's compliance with it. And then as a practical matter, I think we need to have a workable drop-dead date that the trust has demonstrated to us that they comply with those things. And if not, the funds come back to us by a date at which we can turn around and repurpose those funds to people who will use it properly. I know that Mrs. Moriarty had proposed proposed, I thought very reasonably at one point in private dialogue, I don't know if you shared it with others, the idea of using an August 31, 2024 date, and I thought all that seemed sound. But I want to be very emphatic about the idea that we're out there relying on the fact that these funds are going to be properly applied, and if not, guess who's on the hook, and guess who is the embarrassed finance board that's going to have to explain to our constituents how it all happened. Sorry.
We have Karen, Karen, Leslie Tarkington, Nisha, and then Bill Drake. Sorry, that's the order.
I have to say that I wholeheartedly agree with you, Jeff. I mean, you've just made the case for eligibility, confirmation of eligibility. You've just made the case for using them in accordance with the rule. You've just made the case for conditioning this. However, from what we've heard from Amina, that will require that the trust fund be amended. And, I would be comfortable with conditions. I would be comfortable with $300,000, but on the conditions that we've stated, I wouldn't give the $300,000, as Mr. Weisbrod has suggested, without conditioning it, without having the ability to claw it back, because we have had issues in the past with a failed grant, and we're on the hook. Our taxpayers are on the hook for it, and $300,000 is $300,000. So, I mean, I wholeheartedly support everything that you've said. I think you've made the case for a condition of some sort, but the condition will not be effective unless the trust is amended and the ordinance is amended, and that will take some time. So the question is, can we defer this, or do we have to allocate this? I'm not really clear on where we are with respect to these funds until we see that these things are done.
Leslie?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, may I ask Amina a couple of questions?
Yes.
So, Amina, could you please return? Thank you. Thank you. So, just following up on Leslie's, and the conversation is continued here, and then David's point, which, on terms of amending the trust, now that the trust has been formed and, approved by the RTM, who has the authority, to amend? Can it just be done by going back to the RTM the way Leslie suggested, or will all the trustees have to be in place, and then the new trustees then approve this, not just one or two that we've had from an email? So could you explain the process now for amending the trust, please?
Yes. So the Declaration of Trust has a process in place for amending it, and it's essentially any amendments have to be done by a majority of the trustees and approved at a meeting called for that purpose, and approved by the Board of Selectmen and the RTM. I'm just trying to think through the steps here, because there are no trustees as of this time.
Right. So that's what concerned me when I read that section.
Right.
So that's why I'm asking you this question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so you would need the trustees to
Be put in
amend
place
the
first?
instrument. Right.
They would have to be put in place first.
Yes.
order.
And I think they're being put in place,
Sorry?
On the April.
I think, on the April call.
The trustees for this
Yes,
are in April.
yes.
Okay, so that was one of my questions.
Can I
So
just have a follow-up for that?
Oh, yes.
So if the trustees are in place at the April call,
Yes.
then, and they want to make these changes, they could do that immediately afterwards, then the Board of Selectmen, so presumably it would be on the RTM call in June.
Correct.
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 Okay. Thank you.
And again, I understand the amendment that is being talked about here is the ability for the town to get the money back if, in fact, you decided to put money in the fund.
Leslie?
I had the other.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Second question. My second, maybe it's not for Amina, but, Mr. Weisbrod made the point about the 300,000 at risk, and you would just lose the 300,000. But I think that Mr. Raymer clarified, without actually making the additional statement, that you not only, if there's an issue here, lose your 300,000, but in an audit, we would have to repay to the federal government for this grant, this $300,000. So, every time we lose, we're really losing 600,000 or double the 2x, not just X itself, because we've lost the 300,000 within the trust, and then we have to repay once the audit, the clawback once the audit is complete. So, I think we need to be very cognizant of the risks we're taking as we make each of these decisions. Thank you.
Okay, I believe we have Nisha and then Bill.
Yeah, so I'm listening to this discussion, and I think for me, I think just to step back, I think as a community, we're united that we want more affordable housing. And to me, the trust, well, I think, I know a lot of you have spent a lot of time, looking at specifics, and I think some of the concerns that we're raising today really, point out the nuances of, is this trust really going to, do what it's set out to do? And maybe this is a question, and through you, Mr. Azimir, I'd like to ask Amina, is this trust really going to be able to influence, right, developers in, if the objective here is to reduce high density development or, take a project that's 100 units to 98 units, or, what kind of economics do we really need to be able to accomplish what we're actually trying to solve, which is increase the affordable housing stock, right? So is this really, in your view, do you think this is a tool that, especially considering the economics that we're talking about, something that is effective in terms of being able to negotiate with our developers? And I guess the second part of that, and I think both Ms. Faciolotis and Ms. Tarkington brought up, in terms of, allocating to someone like a Greenwich Communities, which has the ability to, go out and, build affordable housing outright. So, and many of us in this business know that you get much more leverage when you construct, right? So you have a 1 to 5. So $1 million given to Greenwich Communities perhaps could be a $5 million build. And if you could speak to, one, what ability do we have really to negotiate with these developers, to really change the scope of these projects in any meaningful way that we're actually solving the problem we're trying to solve. And then second, in terms of, this idea of eminent domain, right, for the housing authority, for example, are they best suited to negotiate with these developers? Because my understanding of eminent domain is that the housing authority kind of has, in some sense, can go right to the developers and buy, has first dibs in some sense of looking at these properties and buying them outright at market price. So are they in a better position to negotiate with our developers? So again, the reason I'm bringing some of these points up, stepping back a little bit from the conversations that we're having, is really, I think we're all having these discussions on conditions and the nuances of this because we are concerned. Is this really going to do what we're trying to do? And if it doesn't, have we just allocated these resources? And not only have we not gotten what we're trying to achieve, but then we've also put this board at risk. So kind of weighted questions, but I'll go a little bit back and forth if that's okay.
Sure. So here's how I'll try to answer your questions. Having spent quite a bit of time with the folks who really were behind the ordinance and the Declaration of Trust over the last several months, I think they have all expressed quite a bit of confidence in their ability to negotiate with the developers, especially with all the projects that seem to be out there these days. They have certainly expressed a great deal of confidence in the ability to make a difference with the trust. Now, I'm no expert on how they negotiate or what kind of deals they put together, but that's certainly what I have heard, and I think that's really what I think you all have heard as well. So I think you really have to give them some time to work through the process and see if they are able to make a difference, as they have expressed that they will be able to with the trust. In terms of Greenwich communities, I think at least at the RTM level and at several meetings, folks from Greenwich communities seemed very supportive of the trust and the ability to make a difference. Again, I don't deal very much with Greenwich communities, but again, they have expressed, I think, their support as well in terms of the ability for this trust and any money in the trust to make a difference, and for the trustees to be able to negotiate deals where perhaps there's a reduction in the size of a development. And there have been various concepts that I know you have all heard over the months. So that's how I would answer your question. I think at the end of the day, you really have to give them time to work through the process with any funds that they do receive, and make a good showing as to what kind of a difference they can make at the end of the day.
Thank you. So I think, thank you for that. So my personal assessment of, and I appreciate you giving your comments on, of those individuals that have given you the confidence. But to me, projects that are, in the scope of $10, $15, $20 million, the ability to influence in any meaningful way by giving them a few $100,000 or whatever that might be, to me, it seems far-fetched. I'm not saying it can't be done, but to me, it doesn't seem it doesn't seem to be able to have a meaningful impact. I think the idea that, again, someone like a Greenwich Communities has the ability to take these resources and be able to do much more, and maybe leverage the idea of eminent domain to be able to go out and negotiate more with the developers. And I think both Ms. Vasiliotis and Ms. Tarkington made this point. I think it has merit, and I think this body should really think about that solution as well, while we're having this discussion around what's the best utilization of not only the housing trust, but also in trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is to increase affordable housing stock in our community. Thank you.
So it's Bill, Karen, Leslie Tarkington, and then Miriam.
I'd like to just try to move us forward in a practical way. We've spent an hour talking about the first portion of the first item of today's agenda. I think there's majority support on this board for some version of this item with some conditions, and so we should make those conditions and move ahead and approve it. And it's not going to get a 12-0 vote. That's fine. I think Ms. Moriarty's conditions make good sense, but Mr. Ozersmeer makes a good point. He's really asking in one form or another for more strict documentation, and that deserves support too. There's two easy ways to do that. One is to have the whole, let me back up. Your attorney, Ms. Amanat, just told all of us that we can't condition the first $300,000. It doesn't work. I'm not in favor of sending this untried trust and ordinance back to the RTM, I think, for its third cycle of review. That's just not practical. I think we should have confidence that the first $300,000, as Mr. Weisbrot said, you're going to put it in the hands of people who've been thinking about it for months. They have the proper objectives in mind. They're going to succeed. It's kind of like the other $500 million that you allocate from this 12-person board. You have confidence that those in whose hands you're putting it are going to spend it properly. This is no different. It's just smaller. So let's release the first $300,000. It's a minuscule risk. It's worth taking with the objectives in mind. We can make all these good conditions that Leslie has started the conversation on the other $800,000, by all means. Let's modify them, as Mr. Ozersmeer says, to firm up the documentation. There's two ways to do that. Either you have all the documentation submitted to the 12 of us, and we review it and approve it for all those deals from the $300,000 through the $1.1 million, or you do what's customary when you do a bond or other financing. You get a legal opinion that says all of these transactions conform to the law. So either review all the documentation yourself or put it in the hands of a lawyer and require a lawyer's opinion that it does meet the ARPA requirements. That's two ways to easily firm up the documentation to everybody's satisfaction. But it's on the second $800,000. So I'd do either of those approaches to achieve what Mr. Rosemuir says about having more rigorous documentation. But let's move forward and not get ourselves caught in our bureaucracy here. I think there's support for this item. Let's move it forward and move on.
Well, with all due respect to my colleague, I can't support what he is saying. I would, if it is at the appropriate time, like to make a motion to defer the allocation of the 1.1 million or 1.8 million, as that motion is still on the table, of ARP funding for affordable housing to our meeting following the meeting of the RTM, where they take action on the amendment of the trust and the applicable ordinance to allow the town to recover funds that are not utilized by April 31st, 2024. There's no reason that we need to allocate this money tonight, or today rather. I think that we could defer the 1.1, or if we decide 1.8, to a future meeting once the trust and the ordinance is clarified to allow a clawback. And I think that that's a good solution and will allow us to move on to approve the rest of the items that are, we're going to be here all afternoon at the rate we're going. And I don't know if that's acceptable to this body.
Thank you. I think Leslie had a question, and then it's Miriam. And then I'm going to have a comment.
Before that, I would also add that this motion would not preclude us from setting conditions once the trust and the ordinance are revised on any funds used in the future.
So may I ask again through the chair to Amina again, please? Amina, sorry to keep making you come up here. Again, as a former chair of the the BET's law committee and a member for some years with Mr. Raymer, this town is a target of litigation, whether we like it or not. It seems to it occurs. So when I look at this trust, I'm concerned in a couple ways that really haven't been publicly discussed. One is the selection of the developer for whom we are going to provide these funds. How do we select developer 1 or developer 2? And how do we protect ourselves from litigation from developers 3 through 11, since I've heard there may be 11 projects right now, from taking action against the town because they've selected 1 and 2 and not, 3 through 11. That's point number 1. And then, why don't you answer that? Are we considering these kind of things? And then the other, I guess I might as well ask the other question at the same time. We have a situation where we have the same people making decisions on the developer, and these same people are also making, they're trustees of this housing trust. They're also making decisions in planning and zoning on the neighborhoods in which these investments will be made. Coming from the financial industry where you're very always cognizant of the risks, Chinese walls, separation of powers, etc. Are we setting ourselves up for litigation by having common trustees with those decision makers that are making the decisions in planning and zoning? So are really 2 separate questions, both related to litigation.
So in terms of the way the declaration and the ordinance is set up, there is not supposed to be this interaction between the Board of Trustees and the Planning and Zoning Commission in terms of the decisions that are made as to which developer gets the funding and which does not. Now, there may be some overlap because there's a project pending before Planning and Zoning, but you have a Board of Trustees who's trying to make some decisions as to allocation of the trust funds. But best case scenario, there really shouldn't be a cross discussion between the Planning and Zoning Commission and the trustees, meaning no deals being made as to who gets the funding, who doesn't, because really the way the declaration and the ordinance is set up, it's the Board of Trustees that needs to make that decision. And they do it based on their expertise, their discretion. At the end of the day, if funds are promised to a developer and then the Board of Trustees doesn't come through with that, then yes, there is a potential for litigation. But again, I think it would be a very fact-specific type of situation. Was there a decision made and a promise made to fund a certain developer, and then the trust backed out of it? So I think, to your point, Ms. Tarkington, it really would come down to the specifics of that situation, but you're absolutely right. This entire board is familiar with all the litigation that goes on, but I think it would really turn on the specific facts. I don't think we can prevent litigation, but I would hope that the Board of Trustees, when they're making their decisions, are doing so in a manner that's independent of other boards and commissions in town, and really following their charge under the declaration and the ordinance in terms of funding.
May I ask one follow-up? So, I'll ask the question differently because I'm not sure I'm satisfied with the answer yet. Should the fact that you allow P&Z, commissioners and staff to be part of the housing trust and also be on P&Z, should that go before the ethics committee or commission? I'm not sure which it is. Mr. Raymond can advise what, in whether there should be commonality between these two organizations.
Again, I think that would, I don't see an ethical issue in terms of the Board of Trustees and the way they're set up. I think we have to at least trust the individuals who are on the board to follow their charge and, for lack of a better way of putting it, do the right thing without, getting into ethical issues. So that's how I would answer your question. If there is an ethical issue that comes up, then certainly that can be brought to our Board of Ethics. But again, I think it would depend on the specific scenario.
Thank you.
Okay, it's Miriam and then Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the threads that has become very clear, in whether it's the Planning and Zoning Commission, the folks who have been charged with creating this trust board, the discussions at the RTM, and particularly the SOMR that came before the RTM last month, is that time is of the essence on this problem. So rather than we've heard various opinions on conditions, et cetera, I think time is of the essence now. I would not be supportive of Ms. Vasiliotis's motion to defer, and I think we need to break as a caucus and discuss all the options before us and come back and take a vote.
I just emailed you my proposed motion also to the full BET.
Stephen?
I have a technical question. My understanding is the Affordable Housing Trust is entered into by the town of Greenwich acting through the RTM. Is that correct? The Declaration of Trust itself.
The Declaration of Trust is approved by the RTM.
Right. So wouldn't it be true, and please advise me if I'm incorrect, that anyone acting as a trustee under the Declaration of Trust would have qualified immunity for the decisions made so long as they were made in good faith and consistent with the Declaration of Trust? And I raise this because I'm addressing the point that Ms. Tarkington raised.
Yes, and that's why I use the word discretion. So when the Board of Trustees acts, like your board or any other board or commission, they are acting and allowed to act with discretion. And yes, so there is immunity.
Yeah, I'm not
absolutely.
I'm not discounting the possibility that disappointed bidders may not raise claims, and as a member of the law committee, I'm certainly well aware of the claims that this board faces. But I wanted to make the point to my colleagues that while it's possible those claims would be lodged, that in the first instance, anyone trying to bring such a claim would have to go over the rebuttable presumption that the board acted with in furtherance of their qualified immunity. Thank you.
Yes, in the event of suit, the first special defense we would raise would be immunity. Absolutely.
Leslie?
If I could just raise one more small point, and that has to do with the issue of direct gift to Greenwich Communities versus going through the trust. I believe Greenwich Communities can be an applicant to the trust and that their proposals would be considered within the mix of the other proposals and transactions being contemplated. I also think that working through the trust, there'll be a set of requirements for documentation and regular reporting that would be easier to work through the trust and its expectation than to have the BET then be responsible for setting up those requirements with Greenwich Communities. I also just sent out to the full BET the proposals, the language that I had presented for 2 of the criteria, and then identified the 2 additional issues which I heard raised by the discussion today that could be considered.
Could you, sorry, I saw the email, but I haven't read it. Could you just enumerate those last 2 conditions, just also for the benefit of whoever's listening?
In response to the discussion, there's concern that there'll be a clawback if either the trust inappropriately makes an award or that the developer doesn't use it appropriately. And so it requires, as a condition for establishing reporting and documentation requirements and access for any required audit, so that there's a little bit more meat to understanding how the trust is going to follow through with their contracts and reporting requirements that may give this board more comfort. And the second is, rather than delay appropriation for any revision to the Declaration of Trust, which may be required, instead to make it a condition of this so that when the RTM acts to approve this in May, that's when the clock starts. As Ms. Cruiser pointed out, time is of the essence. We've already lost a lot of time, both in the clock for the ARP funds, but also for the trust to make have an impact with some of the projects in front of the P&Z now.
Thank you. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, it just goes on, doesn't it? I'm sorry. In response to the last portion of the conversation that was taking place with Mr. Selpst, the trust declaration, which was approved by the RTM, so now it's an act of the town, is explicit that although Section 10, subsection 1, that no person is going to have individual liability, and the town undertakes to indemnify the individuals for their acts. But it does say that the acts of the trust, however, are the acts of the municipality. And so if there's a good lawsuit to use Mrs. Tarkington's hypothetical, if there's a good lawsuit by a disappointed developer who thinks that his competitors were favored over him, as being one example, inappropriately because of graft or corruption or whatever is his theory of the case, that's a good lawsuit, at least against the trust itself, which the town has the obligation to defend. I'm less certain about whether or not the town itself is also a named defendant, but it doesn't matter. That's an academic difference. The one thing I wanted to mention, in case it mollifies the people who were concerned about wanting to condition or not condition the first 300,000 and the first 100,000 being not conditioned, does that frighten them about approving what we're doing at all, if that's a condition that's out there? I wanted to encourage a deep breath and a slightly lighter reaction. If you're looking at Section 6, subsection 1, which is the section that talks about how the trust should begin to act not until there's the first 300,000. The words actually say that the trust should not be accepting proposals, meaning taking them in, not necessarily entering into contracts, but beginning to consider and be expressing words of acceptance until they have the 300,000. But there's nothing that keeps the trustees, once they're in place, which apparently is going to happen momentarily, from beginning to hold a lively dialogue and negotiation with developers. They just can't reach a point where they reach the hand out and say, okay, we have a deal. At that point, they need to have that first 300,000. So it seems to me that we could, if it mollifies people's concern, condition also the first 300,000 if that were a necessary predicate for people to be willing to pass this proposal. I don't think it really, as a practical matter, should hamper the trustees from lunging forward into the negotiation. Once we today appropriate the, whatever the number is, 1.1, 1. Whatever it is, including the first 300,000, with our condition on it, they've gotten the green light. They can move ahead now and begin to settle a deal. And at the point that they come back to us with a deal that works for us, we can lift the condition on that first 300. We can lift the condition on more if that's what they need to be able to make this work. But I think there's a lot more opportunity here for this to go smoothly without all the problems. We just have to craft the correct conditions, which are a good conversation for a couple of caucuses that could take place, and that's a queue line.
Dan, just want to make one quick comment to Ms. Moriarty's point on Greenwich Communities applying to the housing trust. So to me, this really is one of those where, again, makes me scratch my head. Greenwich Communities is a part of the Federal Housing Authority, runs 1,500 or so units. The idea that they would be treated to additional bureaucracy or going through an additional product they should come directly to us. Our role here is to, reduce in some sense bureaucracy. And the part of what the trust and part of these discussions that we're really having is, it's about people and investing in individuals that we think are going to move this discussion forward. So to me, I just wanted to quickly respond to that. I don't think Greenwich Communities should have to go to the trust. If they want additional resources, they should come directly to us. That being said, the reason I'm supportive of the trust in whatever form we all decide as a body is because this is a real problem. We need to address and have all our thinking caps on and throw different ideas. So while I think the housing trust has serious challenges, and perhaps everything that we're discussing today, we need to think about multifaceted solutions, both in terms of, whether it's the trust or investing directly in Greenwich Communities.
Thank you. Leslie?
So just one more comment to Jeff's comment. Again, one way you could also structure it, you're talking about condition on the first 300,000, it could also be the earlier of receipt of private sector funds for the first 300,000, or that, again, perhaps just even the knowledge that the town is pursuing this hesitant on the first 300,000 and the risk related thereto would be enough to help this housing trust raise that seed money that it needs, the 300,000.
Can I move that we go into caucus so that we can, each respective caucus goes into caucus?
Bear with me one moment.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, hoping the board will bear with me. I'd just like to make a few comments, and then I think everyone's had a chance to speak, and then we would go into caucus. First is I would like to address the question of timing of when we make our decision. I think Karen's request that we defer this decision until we really have time to figure this out, I think is well-meaning. I think the point she made is that if we don't do that, we may not even be able to finish ARP today, which of course I think we want to do. I suppose my proposal would be that we just make sure we take as much time as we need today to just make sure we have all the discussions and get this right. So I absolutely agree that, if we have to take more time, we do. I would like to resolve this today if we can. The second thing is I want to talk a little bit about some of the big picture issues, because I think many people on the board have already done that, but I'd like to have my chance to do that. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the conditions and then, where I am on this. We had a discussion about how much of the ARP money is going to immediate concerns versus how much is invested in the future of the town. And some people have called that mill rate relief. I would note that we have 10 million going into drainage, which obviously after Ida is a big concern. We have 10 million going to Greenwich High School remediation. And we have right now over 7 million going to the school's HVAC systems. I think We certainly heard the community yesterday. I think all three of those are incredibly high priorities. Now, it is true that over time, that will reduce our level of debt and will ultimately provide some relief to the taxpayers. But I would like to emphasize that these three places where the first selectman and the advisory committee put the money are very high priority issues. They all fit within the ARP, and I think someone did mention that this is what many towns are doing. So I just want people to be aware of that. I think the second thing when it comes to mill rate relief to our taxpayers, I think we all know that there's no such thing as free money. Greenwich is getting $31.4 million here, plus another 15 to 16 to the schools. Call that $47 million. But that money is also going to every town in America. And I think we all understand the economics between increased future taxes, of which Greenwich taxpayers, because they're fortunate enough to be, we're an affluent town, will be paying well in excess of the $47 million the entire town is receiving. That's simply the economics of how our economic system works. Second is what we don't pay through taxes, we're certainly paying through inflation. So at the end of the day, this act is what it is. It's this job's board to use the money as wisely as possible, and I think the proposal from the first selectman does that. Now, with regard to the discussion on conditions, I support all the conditions that Leslie has mentioned and some of her additional edits. But one thing I would say, two things I would say. One is, whatever our conditions, it has to be very clear, the accountability in the process. We cannot ever write a check to the Treasury. And I would note that when we do these similar arrangements with a nonprofit, okay, and we advance funds to them, whether it's, whatever, kids in crisis, et cetera, there is a very well-defined process about the auditing required. This has been going on for years and years, decades. There's a very clear process, okay? If the entity involved doesn't do what they're supposed to do, they are on the hook to the money to us, okay? In the situation of the FEMA example that Jeff Raymer mentioned, that individual who didn't do what they were supposed to do when the town's on the hook for $90,000, they are directly and legally on the hook to the town. And we are pursuing that. And obviously it's painful and costly to go after somebody, and the town, between expenses and what settlement we may have to accept, will not certainly recoup the $90,000 that we're losing. But there are clear processes to those things. And here, and the reason, by the way, this board is spending so much time, and again, I commend the work everyone here is doing. The reason we're dealing with this is there is no clear process here, okay? We have an affordable housing trust upon which we are layering an ARP requirement. So this is complicated. And I would also note that this has only been in front of the BET since last Tuesday. Okay, we had the budget committee and then we had the first read. So I know when the public's looking at this, it looks like we're, confused, we're agonizing. I think because we're trying to figure this out. But it's not as if this has been in front of the board for months and months. It's just been in front of the board for a week. And we have the right intention to figure this out. In terms of the exact conditions, I think where I'm going is that and I don't know right now the exact plumbing. I think we're going to break for caucus and talk about it. But we need to make sure not only that there's an audit trail, that there's a clear accountability of who is on the hook financially if the requirements of ARP are not fulfilled or the documentation is not fulfilled. So I think that's one puzzle that we haven't quite figured out. I would also note in terms of timing, many people have said that if we condition the $300,000, then we're going to be delaying what the Affordable Housing Trust is trying to achieve. I'm not sure that's the case, because this morning Bob Barilak sent an email to some of our questions saying, well, in terms of your concern about getting the money back, he said, yes, we can modify the declaration. Now, that will mean early June is when it will be, when the RTM will have confirmed that. But right now, we're talking about the money being appropriated in early May. So if there is a delay, it's at most a month. And them knowing that they have the appropriation, they will certainly, I'm sure, be quite active. Matter of fact, if this BET approves this appropriation, regardless of what conditions we put on, and I think we do have to make sure those conditions are airtight, this will be a huge step forward for the P&Z and the trustees of the Affordable Housing Trust. I don't believe asking them to do what they actually just offered to do, which is to make sure this documentation really holds together well, and we don't have to have excess confusion, that they would be willing to modify the declaration. So, I would ask, as we have our discussions, as we take the Affordable Housing Trust up on their offer, it's only a matter of a few weeks. And lastly, I think when I look at, Leslie's, really well-meaning conditions here, I think I probably have two general areas where I'm a little different. I think that Bill Finger last night, in fact, anyone I've ever talked to in this trust team has basically said, we can get this money out the door very quickly. So I would propose, instead of, the middle of the year 2024, we make that 23. That's going to be almost a year and a quarter from now. There's no indication from the trust that they won't be able to deploy that money that quickly. And the second thing is, there was some talk about public-private partnership. There was some talk about all of this money being private, some of it being private. Certainly I on the RTM do recall initially they said it was all going to be private. I get it, that over the ensuing months, I think everyone did more work and I think was well-meaning work. I don't necessarily think it was a bait and switch, but over time they came to a conclusion that there's going to be a mix of money. And in fact, I think one of our select women last week even penned an op-ed saying, look, let's get this trust done, and even indicated that private money could be a big part of this. So ultimately, what I would like people to consider is to, and here would be my straw man proposal, would be to immediately allocate somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 to the trust, with the conditions that have been talked about and fine-tuned, and then have another $500,000 that would be a one-to-one challenge grant to the private donors, which, if they do achieve that, they will end up with $1.5 million. In my mind, I'm just one person. I am very, in my mind, negotiable about the breakdown of those two pieces, but I think it is critical for the long-term viability of this trust that in the beginning, we give a really good faith effort to try to raise private money. Because if we don't do it now, it's never going to happen. And I think a challenge one-to-one grant is the perfect situation to do that. Because I can tell you, and we all know, yesterday was all about the amount of capital needs we have in the schools and throughout the town. And I just think we lose very little. And maybe it's, 600 and 400 or whatever it is. There's a lot of combinations. But I strongly believe that what we propose should have some matching element to it. So, with those kind of, comments, I think everyone else has had a chance to speak. I would propose we break into caucus.
Do you have a motion in writing? Now I'm a little confused before we break. So we have Karen's motion, we have Leslie's motion, we have your comments. Is that a written motion?
Yeah, I mean, in caucus, I was kind of listening to what everybody said, and I will write it in, I will add some of my thoughts to basically Leslie's motion, because I agree with the last part.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, but that's what we'll be doing.
Sorry, David, it's 10:38. We're supposed to have a budget workshop. I think what's our plan for the day? Can we just sort of sketch that out before we break for 15 minutes of caucus, assuming that's enough?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I didn't quite think we'd be here at 10:38. What I would suggest is that I know we have a hard stop today at noon. I mean, assuming that, the committee obviously, takes the proper vote to extend that, or maybe that's my authority. We will make sure that we have time to finish the ARP and allow at least a little bit of time for the workshop. Okay? Thank you very much.
Can we resume in 10, 15? What's the number?
I'd say we resume at 11. Honestly, I would like to make it shorter, but I think to make the time after this productive, I think that's I think that's what we're going to need. Thank you, everybody. Everyone, thank you very much. I believe we have everybody here. So thanks, the audience, for bearing with us. We had a short caucus to discuss the Affordable Housing Trust, and now we're hoping to get the resolution and votes. I believe that there is one motion or amendment on the floor from Jeff Raymer.
If I may at this point, I'm going to, with the permission of the seconder, who is Mr. Selps, I'm going to withdraw that motion for the moment, just to keep the conversation simplified. Not certain whether I'll remake the motion later on, but I'd like to withdraw my motion if the seconder will join me.
Thank you, Jeff and Steve. Floor, I know that I believe, Leslie, you had a set of conditions.
Yes. So I would like to make a motion, and so let me make the motion and see if it has a second. So I would condition 1.1 million of the allocation for the Affordable Housing Trust upon 1, confirmation by the trust that the use of funds shall be those eligible under the American Rescue Plan Act final rule. 2, and this is reworded from what I had proposed earlier, but it's the exact same intent, but written clearer. By August 31, 2024, the trust shall give notice to the BET that any funds allocated to the trust not committed by December 31, 2024 and expended by December 31, 2026, and any such funds, all right, this needs to be modified a little bit, and any such funds shall be restored to the town and shall be available for reallocation. So I'll say it again, and by August 31, 2024, the trust shall give notice to the BET of any funds that were allocated to...
Will not be committed then. Will not be committed by 24.
That will, of any funds that will not be committed by December 31, 2024 and expended by December 31, 2026.
Can you slow just a second? And expended by, I'll take a deep breath.
Okay, I'll start over. You know what, let me send you by email, if that's, I don't know if people have their devices, but the redrafting was really intended for clarity, not to change the intent. Okay, it was just sent, so if you have your devices, you can read along with me. So number 2 says by...
Just give us a second so we have
Sure.
I'm sorry, maybe we'll start again.
Number 2, by August 31, 2024, the trust shall give notice to the BET of any funds that will not be committed by December 31, 2024 and expended by December 31, 2026, and any such fund shall be restored to the town and shall be available for reallocation. Number 3, establishment of reporting and documentation requirements and access for required audits to substantiate compliance with American Rescue Plan Act final rule. And 4, confirmation of and approved of an amendment to the Declaration of Trust to return unused ARP Act funds which will not be committed by December 31, 2024 and/or expended by December 31, 2026.
Leslie, on number 3, you're saying establishment of the trust or establishment of the town of reporting documentation requirements?
It's establishment of the trust.
Okay, so maybe
So
we'll
we'll
want to
add
add
the
that.
words of the trust. Establishment by the trust?
Yeah, that's better.
Yep.
So I make that motion.
Second.
And just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, we will be voting on this amendment first, and then if there are any further amendments, then they would be considered once this is either passed or not passed. Is that how you wish to proceed? Yes?
Yes, I think there's kind of broad consensus that this has been discussed, and I think this condition and amendment has support. I think there will be an additional amendment proposed, but I do not think it conflicts with this wording, so yes. Are there any objections or?
I move that we close the matter and take a vote.
Yes. Bill?
It's our practice not to amend amendments, and this is an amendment. And for my part, I think it's 96% of the way there, but I think we Republicans are going, if it didn't pass, I would make a motion to adopt essentially all of it with one small addition. Maybe it's paragraph 5, sorry about that, which has a matching concept.
Correct.
So anyway, it's a long way of saying we may all find that this doesn't pass, but with a little modification, creating matching, the concepts may pass.
Can we, maybe for this purpose, we allow amendments to an amendment, just so we get the full flavor of what's being discussed?
Are there any?
If that's acceptable?
I'd like to
I don't
hear
think this is
the-
an amendment. This has not been previously moved, so I think this is a motion to condition funds. It's the first time a motion to condition funds has been on the table, and it's perfectly in order for any member of the body to propose an amendment to the condition that's on the table.
Accepted.
Then I propose we do that. So can we have a amendment to?
I move
this
that we
condition?
amend the motion on the floor by adding to the beginning appropriation of 1.1 million, of which 600,000 is conditioned upon the trust raising an equivalent amount up to 600,000 by December 31, 2023, and the 1.1 million is further conditioned by, and the rest are as Ms. Moriarty stated. So it's appropriation of 1.1 million, of which 600,000 is conditioned upon the trust raising an equivalent amount up to 600,000 by December 31st, 2023, and the 1.1 million is further conditioned by, and the rest is as Ms. Moriarty stated.
Is there a second?
I'll second Ms. Fasciolo's motion.
Question, when we say up to, I'm not sure I understand. What does it mean up to? Could it be $1?
Yes, if they raised 100,000, we would match it with 100. If they raised 200,000, we would match it with 200,000.
So
Up to a maximum of 600,000, of which then at that point they would have 1.7 million in the trust. 500 we gave them outright, and then 600 more from the town and 600 from private, and they would have 1.7 in the trust.
I'm not following that, I'm sorry.
Your mic is on.
Well,
Yeah, so we're appropriating 1.1 million, okay? The first 500,000 is for the trust with all the conditions that Leslie and we have discussed. The other 600,000 is appropriated but not released, and the condition is that we will match dollar for dollar any amount of public money they raise. So if they raise 25,000, we will match it with 25,000 up to 600,000. The idea being that they could get to 1.7.
Can I just clarify? I think perhaps the words that are missing is appropriation of 1.1 million, of which the release of 600,000 is conditioned upon the trust raising an equivalent amount up to 600,000 by December 31st, 2023. So we would add the words of which the release of 600,000 is conditioned upon.
So maybe just for the sake of the readability of the instrument, you could handle that as a subparagraph number 5. I think the thing would flow a little better. That you could say that the last $600,000 is further conditioned as, and whatever wording that's comfortable to you. But it might be a little less awkward reading. I'm not trying to change the content. And then while I manage to slip myself in to have the floor, I'll say to you that I would prefer not to have this concept at all. That's very deep for me. I might be to try and reach a middle ground where we could reach consensus. Our public is asking us to try and reach consensus on things, a whole new world for the BET for a while, that maybe we could accommodate to a smaller sum than the 600,000. Can we have some dialogue on that? Try and see if we can reach a middle ground, because you're going to end up with, I don't know exactly what, but a split vote, and it would be a whole lot nicer if we could do this with a 12-0 vote.
First, can we just get confirmation, Karen? Would you be okay with it being clause 5?
Yeah, I think with clause 5, it would just be the release of the last 600,000 is contingent upon, and then the rest was how we stated before.
I just question where you say there, should it be up to and including 600,000, just to make sure that everyone understands?
Fine, up to and including 600,000.
Okay.
I don't think.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of the format and the sequencing, I think that Jeff and Karen are in agreement, and I'm supportive of that change. So let's now talk about if people want to have a discussion about the amount. Miriam.
So I have a question regarding the 500,000 that goes immediately to the trust, which is, do we have a sense, or the folks, Karen, who put forward that motion, have a sense of what that means in ability for the trust to ward off the current 830G projects before them, which my understanding is over a dozen. Is that minuscule?
My understanding that it can jumpstart the process from what we understand from Bill Finger, and then it would also give them time to raise the other amount of money, which at the RTM meeting when this was presented, the commissioner assured that she had private donors lined up.
Mike?
In response to Miriam, in one of the conversations I've had actually with two individuals who will be on the two potential trustees, Bob Barelak and Bill Finger, one of the smaller projects that's being proposed, 830G projects, has already indicated an interest in taking a $250,000 loan from the trust in order to reduce the size of the project. It was going to be, I believe it was going to be a 4-story building. He's proposing to make it a 3-story building. So that much.
I would just add that that's not verified. It's just in conversation.
No, I'm telling you what I'm being told. I'm told. So there is the opportunity to put at least that amount of money to work. I think the full amount that we're talking about, some of these larger projects like the one on Church Street, who knows what impact they might require. But at least in some of the smaller projects, I think we could have an immediate impact.
Bill?
Let's look at the big picture. You know what we just did here, which is a good thing? We just multiplied this 1.1 and made it, what, 1.7 or something?
Well, if they raise...
Pat yourself on the back. That's progress. That's progress. I'd also say, I think this is a lot of fun, but we're determined to deal with this topic until the day's over.
Laura?
Let's vote.
I mean, I do think it's worthy of having a conversation to see if that number, we could reach more consensus. But I'm going to try and calm down because I am very frustrated. We started with 1.8 allocated to affordable housing. It's been reduced to 1.1. Now we're talking about 500,000 free and clear. We know we have projects lined up right now. They have a meeting this afternoon. Some of those projects are on the agenda. I think we're kneecapping the Affordable Housing Trust Fund right out the gate, and I don't like it. I'd love to find consensus and pass this 12-0. I'm not sure we're going to get there, but let's talk about a number. Is 600,000, is that a number that could come down somewhat? I'd rather give them something, but this is not going to solve our problem. This is going to add to their problem. These people on the trust, you're now asking them to find projects, have conversations, negotiate, and fundraise? I mean, really, I don't think that's realistic. And I don't think developers are lining up to give the town money for these purposes. What's the incentive? I'm not seeing it. So let's have a conversation about the amount and let's please vote.
Nisha?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna, I hear the frustration and I appreciate my colleagues' comments, but I think there are many of us in the community, including myself, that believe whether that number is 1.1, 1.8, 2.5, 3.7, whatever number you want to bring up, we might not be able to have the impact that we're trying to have, meaning that this trust is being designed to, in some sense, negotiate with developers and numbers that, I personally believe are not going to make an impact. So to me, if I believe that this trust is not going to deliver what we're trying to deliver, I would prefer to use less of my taxpayers' money to take that gamble. So while I understand we have different perspectives, I think in the spirit of moving forward and addressing the idea of affordable housing, that's why this discussion's at the table. But it's not to say that there is any disagreement that we need to solve this problem, but the idea that this product is the right way to do it is not clear to many, which is why we're having this discussion.
Leslie?
So if this board is willing to give a total of 1.1, it's the mechanism of which you're trying to do that, which is to tease out private funding. Many of the comments said before tried to link the ARP funds to the rationale for the creating of the trust, and I don't see the connection there. But the limitation of the available funds now is handicapping the trust. It's going to make it unsuccessful from the start, and I think it's running counterintuitive to the objective of these funds. I could begrudgingly vote at $200,000 of matching, but once we get to a neighbor, more than half of it, the fund is not going to get access to very early. It's going to take a while to develop. We don't know what resources they've had, but the number that they identified willing to be a donation now is in the 5 figures. It's nowhere near the 6-figure number. And so what you're doing is minimizing the trust ability to be effective now. And the ARP funds, while yes, they are taxpayer funds, if you will, but they're not raised from taxpayers in our mill rate and our property taxes. It's an opportunity to try to provide more services and housing, if you will, to those impacted by the pandemic. And by not giving the $600,000 or handicapping that amount, it's counterintuitive to the purposes.
Okay. I'd like to make a comment. Look, I think we're all here trying to get to yes. I think the idea that by reducing, to me, the idea of this structure, really handicapping or assuring that this trust won't be successful is just something I can't endorse. This town, this body, this BAT has never allocated money to a project like this. It's a complex project. Our community, there's many in our community that would really support this. There are many in our community that don't want to go down this road. So we're about to be in a position where we're going to appropriate $1.1 million for this trust. You know, it's, so if there's, you know, certainly I would not support a 200 number. I haven't cleared this with anybody, but if someone wanted to do a 50-50, 550, 550, I would support that. But I think it's important that this board supports this. 50-50, 550, 550, 1.1, we are not reducing the appropriation at all. And certainly, this is a big commitment. It's a complex transaction for all the reasons many have articulated, and I think it's the right place for us to be. So, you know, I would be willing to go 550, 550, but I do think that unless there's any other proposals, we should take this to a vote.
I'm not commenting on that. I think, I haven't seen, Karen, the motion in writing, but it doesn't talk to matching. I'm not sure as written it works the way you intend it to work or communicates what you want it to communicate.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could, with some, if Karen could share by email her proposed paragraph 5, so we all have something in front of us.
I actually didn't.
I have it. Let me send it around. Yeah.
Okay.
And it does say by raising an equivalent amount up to 600,000. So or a matching amount. I mean, we can change equivalent to matching.
Yeah, I just sent it to take to Ms. Moriarty's points, and I made it our 5th paragraph, and I just sent it around now. So this is the amended language that Ms. Moriarty proposed.
So
You want to say matching instead of equivalent?
might be better.
Can we say, it's okay to say matching instead of equivalent? Karen, you made the motion, that's okay with you? Okay.
It says, yeah, I think it does.
So it'll now say matching. Okay. And I would, you know, with the, you know, I would like to amend the number to be 500,000, 550,000, 550,000. Is there a second for that?
I second that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just to make clear, if they were to raise $100,000 the first week, we would match it with another 100, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Minarski asked that it be done on no more than like a quarterly basis. So, you know, because of the administrative, so, you know, if,
So Nisha,
I don't know whether we need to put that in there, but that's what he requested, and I think that's a reasonable way to do it.
Nisha, can you just add on a quarterly basis?
So how would that work? I mean, they end up that they're poised to do a deal, but you're going to tell them sorry, we just had our meeting, so now you're going to have to wait 3 months before we're going to tell you whether you have this. I don't think a developer is going to want to wait 3 months to see whether or not he has a deal.
You could speak to Mr. Minarski,
No,
who made the recommendation.
just to be clear, I think this is only on the fundraising. So basically, they would report to.
No, we're talking here about release. I don't know if I want to go forward with this at all, but what the mechanics would be that periodic releases of funds by the trust, remittances, that means, to a developer, and that requires a release of condition. Come in and show that there was a match, and we'll give the yay sign for them to release. But sorry, developer, you're going to have to wait 3 months for that because last Tuesday we just met and that we only do this quarterly. I think, you know, I don't want to make the controller's job harder, but I think that that's not well advised.
Peter, do you have some comment on that, a good solution?
First of all, I don't remember making those comments. Can you refresh my memory?
I did speak to you about matching funds, and I asked you several different alternatives, and you said you thought it would be easiest if it was kept to a quarterly basis, but we'll do anything you want.
I don't recall that conversation.
So you don't need the quarterly language.
Okay, let's get away from that.
Good.
Then.
Okay, so that's
the only thing that I need, and I don't need it from you or any of the conditions, is I have to report to the U.S. Treasury quarterly on how much money has been expended. So if you gave them, say, $300,000 as of June 30th, I would put down $300,000. If you gave them the rest of the $800,000 by the next quarter, that's the only reference I made to quarterly reporting. It has no tie-in into the condition.
Okay, thank you. So it will not say quarterly.
Thank you. Let's vote on the 550.
I have a comment. There's no way, in my opinion, that this new body is going to raise $500,000 in the next year and a half. So this is effectively a cut from 1.8 to 1.1 to 550,000 or whatever the amendment will show. I intend to vote no on that. I don't think this is responsive to the First Selectman's request and the voices that we heard so well throughout the community. A small amount of a match I could be okay with, but the size of this match it's inconceivable that this organization will, or any organization, can raise that massive amount of money in such a short period of time. So this is really a disguised way to gut the request that was submitted in the first instance.
Okay.
Can I, Dan, can I just make a quick comment on David's point, if you don't mind?
Very quick.
Yes, very quick. Listen, I think the idea, one of the reasons we want the private sector involved for this match is when you invite the private sector in to evaluate such a complex product, it helps you dot your I's and cross your T's to make sure all of our concerns are being addressed. The trust, which will be a tax-deductible entity, the idea that in the community where our number one issue right now is to address affordable housing would not be able to raise $500,000 in one of the most prosperous communities, and the number one issue that many of our community members are looking at, I think, is not right. So I think if this product is, again, out to solve the problem we are trying to solve, we should have no issue raising private funds. So while I don't love the entire structure of this, we're trying to find a compromise. I would have preferred this to be entirely private capital, simply because inviting the private sector in helps us really think through the structure of this product.
Okay. Any objections if we call the question? Okay.
I'm looking at the language of paragraph 5. Paragraph 5 is capable of the reading that $1 of the 550 doesn't get released until a full 550 has been raised. I wonder if we could accommodate a small, I'm not sure of the wording, but I am sure of my ill ease about 5. The release of 500, means any of it, is conditioned upon the trust raising a matched amount of 500. So that says to me that if the trust hasn't raised 500, if the trust has raised only $549,000, $1 is not being released of that 550, and I don't think that's what.
No,
I'm not sure I'm
that's not
comfortable
the
with the
intent.
numbers, but I don't think that's what you were intending to say.
Say the release of the second 550,000.
Yes.
Yeah, the intent is the first 550 is not subject to
No,
match.
no, I understand that, but
We understand, so the second.
So the release of the second 550,000.
no, it doesn't. The second, so the release of the second 550 means any of it is conditioned upon the trust raising the full amount of 550,000. And I'm pointing out to you that if the trust raises 500,000, not 550, but 500,000, I was assuming it was your intent. Well, then 500 of the 550 can be released.
Correct.
This is not what paragraph 5 says. Paragraph 5 says, I have just a suspicion that Mr. Selps is going to help me with some language.
Any of the second 550, that solves it. The release of any
How
of the
about
second
Stephen?
550.
a matching amount dollar for dollar
No,
up
no,
to?
that's just,
Yeah,
it's making it
that's
worse.
just what I was about to say. That we make the condition on the second 550 that it should be matched dollar for dollar up to
That
550,000.
funds shall be released from the second 550, dollar for dollar, to match the funds that have been raised.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Again, I'm
that's
not.
exactly-
No, you're being very helpful.
Accepting the
Yeah, no,
550, I'm
that's a-
trying to deal with the language.
Great minds think a lot. Thank you, Stephen, because that's exactly what I was just about to propose. So
So, I'm sorry, could
someone
Nisha-
read the point?
could
raising
Nisha-
a matching amount dollar for dollar,
The release, I'm sorry.
of which the release of the second 550 is conditioned upon the trust raising a matching amount dollar for dollar,
No, that doesn't do it.
or
Any of,
Stephen, you had a better wording. Let Stephen go.
The second 550 shall be released dollar for dollar upon receipt of private contributions.
Up to 550.
Yeah, up to 500,000, yes.
Up to and
Stephen, can you
including.
repeat slowly one time?
Yes, so we can look at it in front of us. Nisha,
Up to and equal to, Leslie.
The second $500,000 shall be conditioned upon receipt of private funds, and such funds shall be released dollar for dollar upon receipt of such private funds.
Okay.
No, I understand. But we're all, I think we all understand principally what we're trying to do.
No, we should have exactly the wording since it's critical. We all agree on.
Did Nisha get it from Stevens?
Up to 550,000, yeah. You want to see that one?
So,
Send it, and then, Stephen, if you want to change it, you can change it.
Want to read the final version, somebody?
Who's reading it?
Let me read it, Stephen, and I'll change it if you need me to change it before I send it. The release of the second 550,000 shall be released dollar for dollar, conditioned upon the trust raising a matching amount up to 550,000 by December 31st, 2023.
it's better. I'm not sure it quite gets there, but.
I'm going to send it, and then you guys can
So
comment.
may we please do the following? Our dispute is winnowing down to the point of some members are content with the 550 and some members are not content with the 550. I would like to get to the point where we establish a willingness to do the general process and then focus our attention on it. I wonder if we could take a vote on the proposal as it would exist with paragraphs 1 through 4 for a moment to make a record of where we are on this.
I don't think that has a setting. I think the paragraph 5 that we were just sent does the job. It just has the word release in it twice. I think the first word release can come out and the meaning is the same and we're good to go.
Nisha, can I ask, are you sending this to Amina as well? I'd like for her. And we can take a few minutes. It's important to get this right.
Yes.
Where did the December 31st, 2023 come in?
I think the idea there was it gives them over a year and a half, and it would be, I think Leslie Moriarty's condition was that the funds be allocated to projects by August of '24. So presumably the fundraising would need to be done before the allocation of the funds. So that was the thinking there.
It raises for me a second objection. And so now we end up with two things to talk about. I feel like we're going backwards here.
Do you have another date proposed, Jeff?
I'm only speaking for myself when I do that, but if we're going to act at the end of August, then maybe it would be enough if we knew what funds they'd raised by the end of June 2024. That's just my personal point of view, off the top of my head.
I personally have no objection to that. We haven't all talked about it, but we're trying to get the yes here. So
I don't know why any dates required at all. I don't know why any dates required at all, because the trust is going to know what money they have available to them. They know that the 550 isn't released to them unless they have matching funds. So the August 31st date is the one that matters, of saying, no, they're not going to be able to use these amount of funds.
I would agree with Leslie Moriarty. I mean, we've already got on the number 2 that, if they have funds that are not committed by the December 31st, 24 and expended by 26, then the town gets back the money. So if they raise the 550 or the matching funds by 12/31/24 and commit by then
so
that should suffice.
you'd be okay with the August date that Leslie suggested?
Well, I think in number 5, you don't need any date.
Yeah, I think that just, falls into
let's
number
take the
2.
date.
Number
Let's take-
2 is the controlling as far as dates are concerned, so.
I think that's right.
Okay. We take the date out?
Yeah.
So if we took the date out and we took out the first 3 words, is everybody ready to vote?
No, I don't understand why you're,
Okay, the first 3 words in paragraph 5 are not needed if you look at it closely.
Yeah.
okay. And I would just say that I don't think you even need condition. The second 550 shall be released dollar for dollar upon the trust raising a matching amount up to 550,000. I don't think that's, but, if people want conditions upon.
Is this clear that they're going to get 550,000 up front?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Language is clear to everybody? Okay, thank you.
So, no, let's then have a dialogue about the dollar amount.
I think we have had this dialogue.
No, yeah. Yeah. So it was proposed to you by Mrs. Moriarty, a figure of 200,000. And I understand very well that that a number of members here are also strongly of the view of 550,000. Can we have a dialogue about a middle ground at which a lot of people reluctantly reach the middle and nobody's thrilled, but we come to an understanding and have a 12-0 vote, which I think the community would like to see?
Do you have a number in mind, Jeff?
I'm doing a lot of talking here, but I mean, speaking for myself, I guess I could reluctantly vote for 300,000.
I think the other option is we could take a vote on this and then, if it doesn't pass, propose another number. But Jeff is proposing 300,000. Are there any other proposals?
I wouldn't mind to try and avoid a circumstance where we take a vote on this and the vote is 6-6 with a tie-breaking vote, and then the issue is over, and for the umpteenth time, we've made a demonstration to the public that we don't seem to be able to agree, when I think with a little dialogue, maybe we could agree. And I think substantially my purposes could be achieved with a number higher than 200. Substantially your purposes could be achieved with a number a little less than 550. And we could actually, for the first time, begin to show a little bipartisanship. We have a lot of new members. We have a brand new chair. It would be a nice way for us to begin our work.
Thank you.
I really agree with what Jeff is saying. This sticks in my craw a lot for reasons I just said a moment ago. But I think the benefit of having a 12-0 vote and showing bipartisanship on a vote of this sort will endorse the direction that this BET is going, and that under your leadership, Mr. Chairman, I think we have a good chance of achieving. And so while it would be very painful for me, I would support what Jeff is saying and agree to a 300,000 figure with the hope that we have a unanimous vote and that it signifies to the community that we can work out differences, we can negotiate, between ourselves and come to a conclusion that everyone in the community, I'm sure, will endorse. Not everybody, but at least the overwhelming majority. I strongly support what Jeff is trying to do.
I mean, I just think I like the sentiment. I would just say that I think that there's a lot of different views of this trust in this community. And from my point of view, whether it's 550 or of matching or it's 400 of matching, I think regardless, we are funding the full amount. We are moving this trust forward. And I think that in itself represents, a compromise victory. I will understand some people may be less happy at 550 and more happy if the matching amount was 400, but I really do believe either way, we are moving this trust forward. So I would not, I'm sorry, the 300 number. I personally would not support the 300 number. I'm certainly continue to be at the 550, and I think that, at this point, I would like to call a vote on that. Nisha? Go from one end to the other.
Yep. Sorry, I had a voting sheet. Okay. I'll start. Stephen?
I'm voting no for the reasons expressed by David Weisbrod. I could support 300. I think 550 is an artificial attempt to cripple this. I think this project is important. I would reluctantly support 300. I'm not supporting 500.
Miriam?
Yes.
I'm voting yes.
I would like to pass, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm going to vote no. I think Stephen and David said it well. This is crippling what we're trying to accomplish with affordable housing.
I'm going to vote yes.
Nisha?
I'm a yes. Michael? Mike?
Yes.
David?
No.
Karen?
Yes.
And Laura?
No.
Jeff?
I'm counting 7-5. Oh, wait,
No,
sorry.
I will
sorry,
vote,
Dan.
I will vote yes.
That's 7-5. The yeas have it.
Yes, Jeff?
A motion for reconsideration can only be made by a party who voted on the successful side, which is not me. But I would be grateful if some kind soul who just voted yes would be willing to make a motion to reconsider this motion at 400 to see if maybe we can achieve that.
I'll make that motion.
I think I'm allowed to second, and I'll second it.
So as Mr. Raymer just said, the only difference in the numbers from what Ms. Aurora sent out would be that the contribution would be 700,000 with 400,000 matched 1-for-1 and point number 5.
Discussion?
I don't know.
This tears me up because I still maintain that the conditions are excessive, but in the interest of bipartisanship and seeking to raise a deal, I would support $400,000, albeit with a heavy heart.
There's no further dialogue. Can we call the vote?
Yes. Any other comments?
Take the vote.
Yeah, I'll make a comment. I would agree with Mr. Selbst on the other end of the room.
Okay. Laura? Oh, I'm sorry, Nisha, do you want to call the vote?
Can I call the vote? Yeah. All right, we'll start this
But
side.
I think we have to first do the motion to reconsider.
We have a motion.
Right, to reconsider, okay.
Yeah, so the motion to reconsider was made by Miriam and seconded by Jeff, I believe, correct? Okay. We'll start this side. Laura?
And the motion to reconsider, this is just to reconsider, not to vote.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Karen?
No.
David?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
I'm a no. Leslie Tarkington?
No.
Leslie Moriarty?
Yes.
Jeff Ram?
Yes.
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 Okay. Dan?
I'm a no.
So I think the motion passes 8-4, if I'm correct. This is just the motion to reconsider.
Yes. So if there's no further dialogue, perhaps we could call the vote on the reconsidered motion.
Okay.
Is it appropriate?
What was the?
The motion is 400 conditions, 700 upfront. That's the motion.
This was the motion to reconsider. What was the vote on that? That's what I'm.
7-5.
8-4.
8-4. Oh, no, 8-4, yeah, no.
So just to clarify the number, it's just the 0.5, the second, instead of the second 550, we're saying that 700,000 shall be, or 400,000 shall be released, right? Is that the clear? Yep.
Okay.
Point of order. With a motion to reconsider, can we make a motion at this point to approve the original 1.1 million? Is that in order?
We have to dispense.
We just approved a motion to reconsider.
And that would be another motion to reconsider. It's still the same constraint. It can only be made by someone who said yes.
Okay.
What do you want to do?
Okay, so.
Is there an answer to that?
David?
Sorry?
I was going to say, okay, I like the attempt here at iteration. I will not support the 400, but I think right now I was at 550. I would support 650, 450 split and just get this done. For me, speaking personally, right now.
So I guess there's a motion on the floor. It's its own original motion, and this is a motion to amend.
No, I'm just saying I'm not going to support the 400, but I would support 450 to get this done. So that's all I'm saying.
Okay.
I mean, that's not a vote, but what the vote.
I have to say, I'm confused. Are we reconsidering a motion to reconsider? Or do we vote on?
No, that's been already approved.
The motion to reconsider, but we haven't voted on the substance
Correct.
of the motion.
And I'm just letting Miriam know that.
So, I mean, just from a standpoint of Robert's rules, so now I have a fresh motion on the floor. The body voted to reconsider. That's a motion on the floor. And we can vote on that motion, but now we're having discussion. And a motion on the floor can experience an amendment, a proposed amendment. What I don't know is whether or not Dan was making a motion to amend, in which event I didn't hear a second. Maybe there'll be a second, or whether or not that was just dialogue from our chair that we would have supported 450 but won't support 400.
Correct.
Okay, so a little clarity from the chair as to whether or not you were making a motion to amend or whether or not you were just commenting.
I was making a motion to amend. Do I have a second?
Yes. Second.
So now we have a motion to amend, which we'll vote on first, and then whether it passes or fails, we'll then vote on the underlying motion, which will either be at 400 or 450, depending on what happens on the motion to amend.
Correct.
Sorry to be so Byzantine.
No discussion? Should we go to a vote?
There's a motion to amend the figure to 450.
Correct.
This is agonizing.
So it's 650, 450. Is that where we are?
Yes.
If this motion passes, it would be 650, 450.
If this amendment to Mr. Raymer's motion passes.
Miriam, do you have a comment or?
No, I feel like I'm at a casino right now.
Okay, well, that's where we are. We're at a casino right now. Nisha, can you call the vote?
No, the motion passed. The motion passed at 550.
But there's a motion to amend.
All right, so we're going to start. So this is the.
Because I had a separate motion.
I'm not going to repeat it. So it's the 450,000 shall be released dollar for dollar. Number 5 is changing. The initial 650 is being provided.
Yeah.
So we'll start.
I'm sorry. The point of order. Mrs. Moriarty has correctly pointed out to me, we never voted on the amendment of the original motion to add paragraph number 5.
No, we did vote on that. So the process was, I put a motion on the floor for the condition with 4 components. Karen made a motion to amend to add number 5, and that amendment passed 7-5. At the end of all of this, we have to go back to the original motion for the condition. Okay.
No, that I think was voted on at the 550, and the vote on that.
That was an amendment to add.
No.
And the 550.
If we in fact voted on the amendment to add 550, that put a completed motion on the table.
I never withdrew my motion, so I don't know how Karen's motion would have overridden my motion.
It was an amendment. You put a motion on the
Before
floor.
before we decide that, I have to make a motion to extend our meeting past 12, since it's 12:01, and our notice meeting was to 12. So I am making a motion to extend our meeting to 12:30.
Have we ever done that?
Can't do it. 1 o'clock. We can't get all this done by 12:30.
Well,
What was the number?
you know, okay. I don't know what to say, but I'm making a motion to extend it to 12:30. If somebody wants to modify that motion, they can. At this point, we are over our time limit as far as what we've noticed. So I'm just making a motion to extend the meeting.
Okay. Second?
Seconded.
Any objections?
I'll make a motion to amend this to make it 1 o'clock.
Second.
I just want to clarify, I'm only making that motion because it was in the notice of this meeting, our start and end date. Our start and end time. Normally, we don't do a end time.
No, great idea, Karen.
Actually, the agenda posted only has a start time of 9 o'clock for the special meeting, and we're still in the special meeting. It doesn't have
The
it,
workshop ended at noon.
but we're not in the workshop
Okay.
yet. We're still in the special meeting.
Yeah, but then we have a posted we have a posted workshop at noon. So something's got to give here.
We won't have the workshop's not going to happen
All
at
right,
this
So
point.
for the moment, we don't need that motion. We're still considering ARP.
What is it? Okay.
So
Oh, wait, let me just clarify. If we did want to have a workshop conversation, we couldn't officially start that meeting because we're past the expired time. Is that what Karen is saying?
Correct.
Okay, so let's extend it to 1 We're extending the workshop, I guess, even though we haven't.
Well, let's worry about extending the workshop later. Let's just try to get out of the special
No,
meeting.
you can't extend something that you haven't met on, I don't think. Is that true, Amina? I mean, the
Guys,
workshop
is it
was
okay if we
scheduled
just-
for noon time, so.
Is it okay if we focus, thank you, Karen, but is it okay if we focus on the special meeting and just try to dispose of this?
So can we just establish where we are? Because I'm not sure,
So
I'm not
Leslie,
sure I was seeing the problem. There was a motion by Mrs. Moriarty that had 4 subparagraphs. There was a motion to amend to add a 5th
That passed.
paragraph. And I'm being, do I have it correctly that passed? That puts a motion on the table that had the 5 paragraphs. As far as I know, we voted on that, and that
Correct.
had an outcome. Then there was a motion to reconsider, so that was a done piece of business. Then we had a motion to reconsider. That passed, meaning that we agreed to reconsider, not necessarily to pass the reconsidered motion. And what's on the table now, and that reconsidered motion was to propose 400, and there's a motion on the table now to amend the 400 to 450. That has a second, and that hasn't been voted on yet. Do I have all that right?
Correct, we're about to vote on
All right,
that.
I'm sorry, this is so
I have
complicated.
a point of, I have a question. So the motion to amend passed 7-5.
Correct.
To motion to add the amendment, but then we didn't vote the motion as amended. The vote to add the amendment passed, but the motion as amended, we never voted on. Is that right?
That's
Miriam
correct, and we're
asked to-
still working on the amendments, I guess, right now, but we do have to circle back to the original motion, I
passed.
believe.
Okay, so my motion was to change the number to 450. Okay, and that's been seconded. Can we have a vote?
Stephen? Miriam?
Yes.
Bill Trey?
450.
Jeff?
Yes, for me too.
Leslie Moriarty?
No.
Leslie Tarkington?
Yes.
Yes.
Mike? David?
No.
No.
Laura?
No.
Yes.
I'm a yes.
It's 7-5, is that what it was?
I think it's,
David, Karen, Leslie,
no,
and
David,
David,
Karen,
and
Leslie.
Laura were no's, so I believe it's 8-4.
8-4.
Is
So
that correct? David, so I have David, Karen, Leslie Moriarty, and Laura Erickson as no's?
Correct.
Okay.
So that approves an amendment. It now requires a final vote as amended.
Yes. Okay, can we have a final vote?
Okay.
And you want to go?
Oh,
start
that's,
with
all
Laura?
right, sure.
What are we voting on?
So this is as amended to 450.
So the motion has amended. Laura? I'm sorry, Nisha, you do.
Yep, Laura?
No.
Karen?
I'm going to pass.
David?
No.
Mike?
Yes.
Leslie Tarkington?
And Nisha, you vote.
You
I
gotta
want-
go too.
Yeah, you go. You vote.
I wanted to see, all right,
Yes.
okay. I'll be a yes. Leslie Tarkington.
Yes.
Leslie Moriarty.
No.
Jeff Raymer.
Yes.
Bill Drake.
Yes.
Miriam Cruiser.
Yes.
Stephen. Dan.
And I'm a yes.
So I think that's 8-4 again.
No,
I'm sorry, Karen.
I'm
Go
a
ahead.
no.
Okay.
8-4.
Yep.
No, it's 8-4.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I believe we've dispensed with the Affordable Housing Trust. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully we can plow through the rest of this. The next item, I believe, is the next item is Board of Ed various school HVAC upgrades. I'll make a quick comment here. It's my anticipation that this amount might be changed and this amount will potentially be increased. I would like to have us be able to come back to this because I think that we should look at how it's, have a discussion about providing some kind of guidance on the allocation. But I'm not aware of an motion at this point to change it. But I do think, depending upon other motions made, there may be a motion to increase it later. Is that acceptable? Okay, thank you. Next item, library, 100,000, ionization.
Is it possible, Mr. Chairman, that we have general agreement on the other items, and rather than go item by item, we can simply have a motion to approve all the balancing items?
No, there were motions.
There'll be others? All right,
Okay.
never mind.
Leslie?
So I would like to make a motion to delete library antimicrobial ionization for 100,000. And this is for 33 antimicrobial units. And I will be, so my motion is to delete 100,000, but I will add here that I will be making a motion. This is going to be a little difficult here because we don't have the money. I'm going to be making a motion to add to this ad for libraries HVAC, $325,000. So really.
So I'll second that, Leslie.
Okay, so
Yeah,
so
I'll
Dan second,
the
and I'm just advising that I plan to, once we take a vote on the ionization, to add the larger HVAC for the library, which fits the profile of what qualifies for ARP. So the HVAC for the library would qualify for the American Rescue Plan.
Thank you.
How much is that?
That's
Discussion?
$325,000, Leslie.
Okay.
And where are those funds?
Repeating $325,000.
No, that's not my question. We are dealing with an allocation of $31,399,117.
I'm sorry?
If you net are increasing an item, it seems to me then it necessarily has to be coming from somewhere, the net has to be coming from somewhere else. So as a point of order, I'm asking where that's coming from.
I said that I would be making this motion, the second motion, at the appropriate time. I didn't say, I'm just giving you the heads up that I'm not really reducing the library as such. I'm actually increasing.
Where's the 225?
But,
Well,
so,
I-
I mean, by the way, I
That's
think
why
the
I
point
think-
here is that the motion right now, okay, from Leslie, is to cut the 100,000. She's indicating that she anticipates that there may be additional other cuts that would allow her to allocate 325. But at this point, clearly that, I would agree, that motion to add the 325 would only happen, if there were funds freely up. So what's in front of us now is the cut of 100,000. Is there any discussion?
I have a question. First of all, I'll just say this because this meeting will take a while. We did have the opportunity at our first hearing of the ARP to talk about some of the options that people will consider. It's really tough to operate on the fly this way with new ideas being thrown out. The question of the 325, clarifying that's currently in the capital budget for the town, and so you're looking to remove that from the capital budget of the town to place it here. Can I ask for rationale?
I haven't yet made that motion, but I think, it is a project in the capital budget that fits the profile, and it's just managing the capital, but I don't think we need to talk about the rest of it at this point in time.
Well, it's part of the rationale. And your expectation is that the library would not then move ahead with ionization units?
Well, I mean, each ionization unit is $3,000. It's more like an operating expense. I think that there's probably flexibility in the library for them to do that. But this does address a major library, or would, but that's not my current motion, of doing a major HVAC project for the library within this ARP budget. And by the way, I did review all of these points. If you go back to when we talked about this last Tuesday at the Budget Committee, but made no motions at that point in time.
I have a question of Ms. Tarkington, through you, Mr. Chair. How are these two projects connected? Are they mutually exclusive? Does one need to come before the other? They both seem to deal with air.
Both of them, I guess both of them deal with air. One is a major project, so it's good to get major projects done. And, that's why it's being proposed in this manner. And also looking at this budget.
Okay. Nisha, do you want to call the vote?
Sure. I'll start. Laura, so the motion is to delete 100,000 antimicrobial ionization from the library.
Is it a two-part motion? I thought the second part
Oh,
was
it's just one motion.
Oh, it's
only one
just
motion
one
this
motion.
time.
Okay, sorry.
But I gave a preview.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, no.
Steve? No. Stephen? Miriam?
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Mike?
Yes.
Karen?
No, you got David first.
David?
No.
Yes.
Dan?
I'm a yes.
So it's
Nisha
6-6.
gets the vote. Okay, the vote is 6-6. I will pass my tie break. Yes, the motion passes. Next item is the Nathaniel Witherell HVAC upgrades. Joe?
I'm going to make a motion.
Sorry.
I move that this project be eliminated here. While it may be needed in terms of priorities for HVAC, I think our schools have a higher priority, and therefore my motion to eliminate this $950,000 will free the $950,000 to be allocated to school HVAC items, which is 2 lines above on your big page.
Second?
I second.
Okay. Thank you. Motion by Bill, seconded by Mike. Discussion?
I have a question for Mr. Drake. Were there originally, and apologies, maybe I should know this, were there originally HVAC school amounts that came in above this 7.240, and where do you suggest the 950 go to? Is there particular projects?
On this, I'm going to ask my colleagues to help me out. I think Nisha has done some homework on this, so I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes, there will be another motion. We'll be allocating additional school HVAC, and we'll give a breakdown of those exact by school.
Thank you.
Can I just, one more comment, please?
Yes.
I'd just like to add to Mr. Drake's comments that Nathaniel Weatherall in Project Renew did replace the HVAC, and it's my understanding that the C of O on this only took place, I believe, in 2017. So this is perhaps a project that can be deferred.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to make the point, I think certainly school HVAC projects are very important, but so are Nathaniel Witherell. And the Nathaniel forget it, TNW, addresses, again, it's more in line, it's very much in line of what the ARP Funding Act was intended to do. These projects, as described to us, address a design issue that wasn't anticipated when the prior HVAC project was done, which was dealing with the individual droplets in individual rooms and the way air is moved around the building. So yes, they did an HVAC project recently, and yes, it is completed and has a CO, and that this potential funding was not in the immediate term of their capital budget, but COVID created a new issue for Nathaniel Witherell. It created highlighted a way that their air systems function that does not prevent the movement of droplets and other items within the air, within the space. And this, to me, epitomizes what the ARP Funding Act was intended to address. I am not proposing to reduce the support for capital projects in the budget, but I think we have the town has a responsibility of addressing both the initiatives.
Thank you. I'll make one comment. I really agree with a lot of that, Leslie, but ultimately, this is the only town-owned nursing home in the entire Northeast. And these, what we learned from Project Renew was there were a lot of good intentioned ideas about how to spend the money, what to do. And ultimately, some of those mistakes, some of those issues, such as short-term rehab, ended up not being the right business plan. Ultimately, there have been some proposals the towns have received. Where we really need to be is to have high-quality professional management for this facility. So we on this board and those in the rest of town government can focus our energies on what we need to do, which is public safety, schools, and all the rest of the core government projects. So that is what will drive my support for this motion. Nisha, can you call the vote?
The vote is just to delete the 950 for the moment.
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
No. Miriam?
No.
Bill?
Yes.
No.
Leslie?
No.
Leslie Turkington?
Yes.
I'm a yes.
Yes.
Mike? David?
No.
Karen?
Yes.
Laura?
No.
I'm a yes.
That's 6-6.
Okay. I will cast the tie break, and that motion passes 7-6. Which I thought you had a motion on. Do you want me to? I'll do it. Since you
I'm sorry.
Okay. I will make a motion to, I believe the net of those changes, and Roland can confirm it, is $725,000.
Not yet.
No,
Not yet.
We
Because
merely deleted.
She hasn't put
100,000
library.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
and deleted 950. You're at $1,050,000.
Bones, okay. Leslie, do you have a motion?
Yes, I have a motion. My motion is to add the HVAC at Greenwich Library to the American Rescue Plan from the fiscal year 23 budget request. Again, as I said earlier, HVAC qualifies for the American Rescue Plan.
I'll second that.
We have a Leslie Tarkington motion, Nisha Rohr second. Discussion. $325,000. It is an item in the fiscal 23 library budget. Nisha, can you call the vote?
Yes. Laura?
No.
Karen?
Yes.
David?
No.
Mike?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Leslie Turkington?
Yes.
Leslie Moriarty?
Yes.
Jeff Raymer?
Yes.
Bill Drake?
Yes.
Miriam Cruiser?
I abstain.
No, and
I am a yes. I believe we had 2 noes and 1 abstention. Or no, you have it.
I'm sorry.
You did, I believe, yeah.
9-2,
I have
9-2-1.
7-4-1. Is that right?
How many noes? The noes were
4, I think.
Laura, David, and Stephen.
Yes, that's what I.
So it's 8
831. Okay, that motion passes. I have a motion to add, Roland, can you confirm that the net of those is 725,000? We had a cut of 100, we had a cut of 950, and we had an add of 325. I believe the net is 725.
It's correct.
Okay, I make a motion to add $725,000 to school HVAC.
I second that.
Discussion?
Question, if I may. So are you adding it to the BOE item that we saw as the first item?
Correct,
under
various
HVS?
school HVAC upgrades. So that number will be increased by 725,000. Roland, can you just read out the number?
No.
And then we also added
Minus
325.
325.
We added 325.
You're adding 725 to the BOE HVAC. The 325 was the library.
We added that.
If you delete the 100,000 and delete the 950, that gets you to $1,050,000, but then deduct the 325, it leaves 725. So he's taking the deleted funds that are remaining and making an application of it.
So we added a new project.
Well, I'm adding to the current project, 725.
I got it. No, but he was missing the 325 where it went.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Okay, and I believe Leslie, you seconded my motion?
The motion was Dan, Leslie Tarkington.
Leslie Tarkington.
Seconded. Yep.
Okay, can we call the question?
I'm going to call the vote,
Wait,
but
can I?
I'm sorry, of course.
Just an explanation. So you're adding the 725. Do you have any stipulations on how it will be utilized? Or is it just for schools' HVAC project?
It just goes into the category.
Right now, it is just an add to that number with no conditions. There's going to be one more motion that Nisha's going to make that will kind of allocate that. Obviously, there'll be, as always, there'll be sub-accounts, so in the end, the schools can move it around, but there'll be an indication of where we are putting that money.
So there's going to be another motion within the HVAC category?
Correct.
Does it impact, would it be helpful for us to understand that motion and making this decision? I don't know what other motion could be.
That's a very reasonable request.
can you give us 5 over here?
I don't know how many more do I need to hand on?
Sorry, it's coming one by one, but
Yeah, exactly.
That's enough.
Make sure we can do it, right?
Want me to just talk about it real quick?
Yes, Nisha's going to discuss this. She's not making the motion at this moment, but she's going to discuss this for background. Thank you.
well, for the moment, I mean, I gather there'll be something else coming because the list that has been shared with us by Nisha, thank you very much, comes to $400,000 more than we've seen cuts for so far.
So the current, let me just clarify. So the current allocation on the ARP sheet is $7,240,503. The motion that Mr. Azizmir has made is to add $725,000 to that allocation, which would bring it to $7,965,503, which is what's in front of you. And then the subsequent motion would be to subballocate that 7.965 million as shown here. And just to kind of clarify, these specific allocations are in the fiscal 23 recommended capital budget in the Board of Ed's projects. And I guess the only clarity that would be needed is on the Julian Curtis. The fiscal year 23 ask is only for 20,000. And then there's an additional 3.175, which is requested in fiscal 25. Our suggestion here is to accelerate the HVAC that the Board of Ed has requested in fiscal 25 to fiscal year 23, understanding that this is a high priority item that the school needs. The current allocation for Julian Curtis in this particular sheet is 1.815,503. And the sense for us would be to make sure the balance is addressed at our future meeting.
At the fiscal 23 budget.
Yeah, so right. So we will make sure that we get to the entire Julian Curtis HVAC requirement in fiscal year '23. Does that make sense, or? Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, the only motion on the table is to increase the HVAC by $725,000. As is noted, that will create a number in excess of the fiscal '23 request, and the remainder amount, as Nisha mentioned, would be used to partially fund Julian Curtis, accelerating from fiscal '25 to '23. It is our expectation, or we will make a motion, or someone will make a motion on decision day to appropriate additional monies in the fiscal '23 capital budget such that we would fully fund the fiscal '25 Julian Curtis HVAC. Discussion? Miriam?
So I'm going to say apologies if this comes out the wrong way, but I'm trying to word this as we receive this page. The Julian Curtis portion of this seems like another way to do what this body did last year, which was ask the Board of Ed to come back with different ed specs, and gave the Board of Ed $200,000 to do so. And they went away, spent none of our taxpayer dollars, rethinking this, and came back and said, you know, we really want the ed specs as they were. And this seems like we're doing it, but in a different way. Am I reading that incorrectly?
That's not my interpretation, Miriam. So the actual amount being accelerated from Julian Curtis is directly from their ask, right? So in their HVAC ask for the in their capital request ask, 3.175 is requested to address all HVAC needs for Julian Curtis, but it's in fiscal year '25. Our thought here is, and we believe very strongly, that HVAC needs to be addressed immediately at this school. So we are proposing to accelerate that, which is taking us over the total HVAC request from the Board of Ed. So we are increasing the allocation for Julian Curtis above and beyond what has been requested.
Okay, I'm sorry, Jeff, just a point of clarification. So if the Julian Curtis ed specs were done as currently proposed, would this not be taken into account when they deal with the entire school and the ed specs that we currently have, that the Board of Ed currently has before them? I.e., would this not become a redundant number because it is part of the larger
I totally hear you on that. However, the way it's been presented to us is we have ed specs for Julian Curtis in front of us. We have a number for renovation and expansion of Julian Curtis. In addition to that, and my assumption is either there's some duplicative requests from the Board of Ed, but that's the way it's being presented, or perhaps they were not going to address HVAC in its entirety in the ed specs, because the ask as it stands today in our updated recommended capital budget is we have ed specs with recommended expansion renovation plus an additional 3.175 that's being requested for fiscal '25 to address HVAC. So if it was duplicative and a mistake, I'm not sure, but that's the exact number that the Board of Ed is estimating to address HVAC.
So
has this
point of order for a moment? All that's before us on this motion, I appreciate the fact that Mrs. Moriarty asked for some information, and graciously Mrs. Aurora has shared information with us. But the item that's before us right now is to add $725,000, which was made available by the previous three motions, and add them to the line that has already $7,240,000 and change for indoor air quality at various schools.
That's correct,
and I think what's being said here is that there will be later a specific motion which may enjoy a successful vote or may not enjoy a successful vote, in which they want to go back and make a specific allocation of that $7,900,000 and change figure. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So right now the motion that's before us is only to appropriate, to increase the $7,240,000 and change to bring it to $7,965,000 and change.
Correct.
I'm sorry. Yes, 7 million. Yeah.
Can we call the question?
No.
Oh, of course. Sorry, Leslie. I didn't realize you had your hand up.
The reason that this information is helpful is because there's a disconnect here. First of all, the $7,240,000 and change that's in the plan was intended to address Western Middle School's $6.7 million project. Eastern Middle School's $200,000 project, and North Miami School's $243,000 project. That's how you got the 7240. The reallocation provided for the next motion ignores that initial reallocation. Instead, so now Western Middle School will need to come back into the budget at $6.7 million because it's reallocated to all these smaller projects. Not sure that makes sense. It's double counting the Eastern Middle School and Old Greenwich in both places, so you've got 443 too much allocated. And to address the elephant in the room is it's basically defunding the Julian Curtis renovation. The Board of Education was very clear that their budget had included maintenance capital for all of their renovation projects to give that information to the BET in case it did not move forward with renovation funding. So the assumption, the $3 million plus that's in here for Julian Curtis HVAC was provided. I don't know if that's a full replacement of their
it's not,
AC. And the number you have isn't, but even the number in the capital budget, I don't know the scope of that work because it was out in fiscal 25. There's a bigger issue of when do you do that work? If you're going to do any work in the building, it's better to do it all at once and not piecemeal, et cetera. So you're making clearly a policy statement, which this board should consider, on how to move forward with JC. Again, new information today at this meeting. But I think just as we talk about, are we reallocating $725,000 to AC projects, the backup documentation just doesn't jive with that number.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Obviously, that allocation will be in a second motion. Can we call the question of adding?
No, I have
okay.
I have a question. So we had, I'm really sort of swamped here, frankly. We had our workshop, we had our first read, if I could, of the ARP, and none of these changes were introduced. None of them were shared with me, or I don't know about others in the community or on the caucus. I wonder if any of these were shared with people on the Board of Education, the various allocations that you have on the page. But I smell a rat here, just as I did, I think, with the trust fund. I mean, putting these conditions on is a way to gut the project, and here I think we're essentially seeding the path to gutting the A&E work that is needed for Julian Curtis. And so I don't like the way this is, I don't like the governance around this. I don't like the way it's proceeding. I don't like the last minute presentation in this fashion. I don't like the lack of any review. I don't like the fact that it's unclear whether anybody in the Board of Ed or otherwise were involved. It's just not becoming.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
I just want to, can I just add a quick comment on what David said? So you know, what I'm not appreciating, and again, coming in, not having the history of what's already been voted on this board in previous years, you know, the idea of the expansion and renovation of Julian Curtis, some of us are unclear on, including myself. So the idea that we are not going to move forward on ADA, security, HVAC, and tie it to the entire expansion and renovation is just not fair to our Julian Curtis families. The idea that it's an all or nothing, when there is a real discussion being had in our community. Do we want to expand and renovate a school that has declining enrollment? Now, I know we can sit here and have that discussion back and forth, and there'll be different opinions, but the fact of the matter is there is a discussion being had. But the idea that we cannot move forward on the essentials of HVAC, ADA, security, and we're going to tie it to the overall project is what's often done in other larger bills where you put a smaller one in and you try to tie it all together. So to me, this is actually trying to get us to the right place, making sure we address what's the highest priority items in our schools, which is HVAC, ADA, and security. So in this particular motion, we are going to make sure we get that done, and that is the spirit of the additional dollars that are being requested for HVAC today.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you, Nisha. Nisha, can you call the vote?
Okay. Laura?
No.
Steve?
You have to use the mic.
I feel jammed by this. I feel jammed by the lack of any prior discussion. I feel jammed by the fact that none of this has previously been raised with the public or with the Democratic caucus. I think this is the wrong way to move forward on this. No.
Miriam?
No.
Leslie Moriarty?
No.
Jeff?
No.
David?
No.
Leslie Tarkington?
Why are we doing it
Why are we
that way?
voting?
Why did we just do partisan votes versus down the?
Oh, I'm sorry, I just had it in my sheet and I was having a hard time keeping on tally.
Why
Yeah.
don't,
We're
no,
just
just to be
really
fair, no,
making
no,
it obvious.
Nisha, why don't we?
I'm sorry, I just, yeah.
Nisha, why don't you just,
Okay.
why don't we just, is it okay if we clear that vote and then start from one side? Okay?
Okay, Laura?
No.
Karen?
Yes.
David?
No.
Mike?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Leslie Tarkington?
Yes.
Leslie Moriarty?
No.
Jeff Raymer?
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
I'm a yes.
And I apologize for that reading. I just was having a hard time keeping tally. So I had a new spreadsheet in front of me.
What's the vote? Okay, I will cast the tie break. That motion passes, the amendment passes 7-6.
Okay, so I will make the motion to allocate $7,965,503 across various Greenwich Public School projects. The fiscal year 23 recommended capital budget provided a breakdown of these requests per school, and those are what's being utilized to recommend the allocations that are in front of you.
I'll second that.
So I just want to confirm my understanding that the projects that are in the fiscal year 23 budget, there'll be a corresponding motion to remove them from the fiscal year 23 budget.
I would
On the
anticipate,
April
I would
19th.
anticipate that.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
I can-
except that you haven't talked about Julian Curtis and you haven't addressed Western, right?
My understanding from what's been said today is that a corresponding amount to fully fund JC we would see a motion on decision day to add that amount. I think it's on the order of a couple $1 million or $1.5 to $2 million. This approach, unless there were other motions made, would not be funding Western Middle School for fiscal 23. I believe it was originally a fiscal 24 and 25 project.
So, but it would be going back into the fiscal year, the
24,
capital
25,
plan
right.
for, as it's been in the capital plan.
Okay.
So it'd be returning.
I just want to point out the Western Middle School HVAC project, when the BOE came before us, is 90% designed. So we're taking a project that is 90% designed and moving it from fiscal 23 to fiscal 24. Is that the intent?
Okay, just a comment. Maybe you can help us, Laura, but Miriam and I are looking at the general fund capital page 105, which is the HVAC of all the schools, and there's nothing in there this year for CMS. So what are we missing?
Western.
Western Middle School.
Nothing in there for
Western Middle
WMS.
School is
What are we
not in
missing?
here
If
because
it's-
it's in ARP right now.
ARP.
And so what we're proposing to do is take it out of ARP. It's not listed on this breakout. And it's, from what I understand, it's not, and I could be wrong because, you guys all do this in caucus and we're finding it out now. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is, I'll echo the comment. This is not a way to do business. I can't operate like this. So let's just leave that aside. But what is
think
happening with Western Middle School?
The aspersion that we're hiding something
Bill,
is
it's not an
false.
aspersion. It's a fact. You guys are doing this in caucus and closed doors. I mean, talk about non-transparency. You have got to be kidding. I mean, I have people texting me right now like, what is going on? And I have to say, I do not know. This is a backdoor mechanism to kill JC. And now you're taking a project at Western that's 90% designed and you're moving it forward 2 years, which makes no sense.
We're-
And I'm not making personal comments. This is in general governance, the way we're operating. Please don't take it personally. I am really, I don't know how we're going to do this in 17 minutes. So we need a plan.
So my small detail of a question is, just help me find where is Western Middle's HVAC in the general fund.
It's not. It's in ARPA right now.
Yeah,
When it
it's an
was
ARPA.
identified to be part of the ARP fund, it was never included in the capital plan. That was the understanding, that the first selectman removed projects from the capital plan that were to be funded through ARPA.
And then in the final proposal, it was indicated as various HVAC. I will just thank you, Laura, for your comments. I will, and I just want to relate to,
The CIP sheet.
kind of make a comment on something David had said. I will say one thing, we're talking about the HVAC right now, but in terms of transparency, since last September, for example, on the Affordable Housing Trust, I have been talking in public, at public meetings, about the idea of a matching fund. So the idea that everything we're doing today is not transparent, and I do understand, I listened to the Budget Committee discussion of this, and there was definitely discussion about Nathaniel Witherall, ionization, some of the school, and the idea of getting as much into school HVAC as possible. The actual allocation here, yes, I mean, that was not discussed in public, but if you really look at the allocation, it's basically the fiscal 23 budget with the remainder going to Julie and Curtis. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't know that the idea of us trying to, and again, we heard it last night. I mean, everyone's talking about schools, capital, HVAC, ADA, and security. And that is the essence of what we're trying to do here. And with regard to the American Housing Trust, again, I'll say it again, I've been talking about the idea of a match program in public, for months. So that none of either of those things should be a big surprise. Yes, Leslie.
I'd like to make an amendment to reallocate the funds so that $6.8 million goes to Western Middle School, $200,000 goes to Eastern Middle School, $243,000 goes to North Miami School, which was the proposal that came from the first selectman for the use of those funds, and then to take this remaining funds, the $725 that's newly added to this fund, to allocate it towards the Greenwich High School project, which would then have two sources of funding, ARP and town funding.
Second. I second the motion.
If I can make a comment on my motion, I think, to some degree, money is fungible. I think I'd like to debate the issue about how to move forward on Julian Curtis when we have the whole budget in front of us, and we can accelerate the HVAC projects at that time if you want to prevail with that proposal, and maybe we get more information on how that really affects a plan to develop a plan for JC. I have a different approach to that, but maybe we can find a middle ground. I think essentially still fund school HVAC at the same dollar amount that has been approved to date, and it's allocated for the project which has been slated to move ahead.
Discussion?
I do think there's a recommendation or a motion on the table already, Leslie. And, we know that sub-accounts are sub-accounts and they can be moved around, right? I mean, that's what my understanding. I mean, again,
but if the schools,
we have not separated, this is not being separated into each separate approval. This is an allocation of sub-accounts. So I think that discussion can continue as you want it. But I think that a good proposal has been put forth, and we need to proceed on it. But we understand you have a motion on the table, so we'll vote on it.
That suggestion goes counter to what we were trying to accomplish with the Board of Ed, so that there's clear communication. What are these funds? What are they being used for? We want to send that clear message to the RTM. So if we're voting on the specific projects it's being allocated to, I think the amendment is warranted to be considered and voted on.
So now I'm unclear as to the motion. Mrs. Tarkington has said that these are merely suggested amounts and sub-accounts.
There's sub-accounts.
and the funds can flow, then I guess we don't need the allocation. We just need, all we need to vote on is the 7.9 and change.
I thought we already voted. We
if-
already voted on that number, Jeff.
Well,
So,
but
can I-
now I'm hearing that what we voted on was only a suggested allocation, and that these funds are at the pleasure of the school board to flow back and forth among its various schools, including but not limited to those, and certainly not in those amounts. Is that what we were supposed to understand was voted upon? Because it appeared to be quite different to me. It appeared to me that a rather specific allocation, school by school, was being made here.
Okay, so Jeff, I think I would agree with your analysis that if we make an allocation, we expect sub-accounts to be created and that allocation be followed. Clearly, though, the Board of Ed, as always, unless we unbundle, it does have flexibility to move between them. Perhaps a potential way of handling this is to withdraw the motion of how this is allocated and keep the full amount in various HVAC, with the understanding that in the fiscal 23 budget, depending upon what we may pull forward or what we may cut from the fiscal 23 budget, that ultimately the schools will then allocate that into this if they would continue to want to have the project happen. That would allow us as a BET we now have almost 3 weeks to talk about things, to sort out. So what would happen is we would just leave it unallocated, and then based upon our fiscal 23 budget actions on decision day, then the Board of Ed could then backfill any project that was cut. If we move a project forward, then they would be able to do it from there. So we wouldn't be making those decisions today. That would be a proposal for Nisha and I to withdraw the motion and move on.
I just raised the question, and I appreciate you trying to give people time to consider the right way to move forward on here. The question is really as a former RTM member. Okay, so they're going to be getting documentation on almost $8 million of school HVAC project without any detail. It's going to be hard to connect the dots. And in our budget motions on our final budget, we may have to add projects, delete projects, move forward projects. It may get confusing at that time. So I just want to raise that.
No, Leslie, I think that's a fair point. I would note that the current document from the first selectman is in that exact place, various HVAC.
No, the documents identify the 3 schools.
Right, but the
Not
item,
on the cover
right,
page, but it's on the CIP sheets,
understand.
which are binding.
Okay,
right?
so, what I get that, but ultimately, we can either try to do the allocations today, which I understand the concern about doing that, or ultimately the allocations will be effectively implied from any actions taken in the fiscal 23. There's no perfect solution here, Leslie. And in fact, this ARP is a very new process for all of us. It's not ever happened before. And, in just consideration of the concerns of this body, I think that we just added the 725 to the school HVAC. I think we should all be excited about that. We leave the allocation. We make no motion on that, and then whatever happens in the fiscal 23 budget will inform ultimately how the Board of Ed allocates that.
So
that's otherwise I think we're going to need to have a vote on the allocation now, and I appreciate why people don't want to do that.
So
is that an okay compromise?
I still have a point of order because the CIP sheet has an allocation, not for all the funds. It's missing the other 725. But maybe then what's being proposed, if I understand correctly, is that we're going to appropriate the sum, the 7.9 and figures, but step back from and not include in that ARP appropriation either the allocation among the 3 schools that are in the CIP sheet or the allocation that was presented by Nisha. It'll simply be an omnibus allocation for the purpose of school HVAC in the total amount of the 7.9 and change.
So, right, the motion would be to withdraw this motion.
Yes.
And delete from the CIP sheet those 3.
The allocation.
And that would be the compromise, and then we'll have time to sort it out.
Does that work? That works.
But may I add, but with the intent that when this allocation is done, there would be sub-accounts established.
Yes, of course. That would be standard process.
Yes.
There's no sub-accounts because we have no allocation among schools.
No, I said when the accounts, when they were allocated, the intent would be that there would be sub-accounts.
Well, whatever happens then will happen then. It'll be whatever's moved upon
No,
and voted on.
because it comes back here also. So to sort of address what Leslie is talking about, the BOE will set up the sub-accounts for tracking these, because you're now going to have a situation with any of these schools where you're going to have multiple sources of funding. So you're going to have them likely both, as we'll see later on with the sewer maintenance fund, or where you're going to see it in probably more than one place.
Look, I don't think we're going to resolve it today, so I will withdraw my amendment if you're going to withdraw your motion on the allocation.
Right, and then I would be making a motion to simply, from the CIP sheet, remove these 3 schools and just leave it general.
And that requires a
Later
motion.
discussion.
If that's your motion, I'd second that motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion. I'll
So
make
you
a.
and I withdrawing your
I'm
motion?
Oh,
going to withdraw my motion.
You're okay with doing amendment?
Yes, I am too, but Dan has just made a motion to remove from the CIP sheet the allocation among those 3 schools, and I've seconded that. That's a motion on the floor.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Discussion?
Does Leslie have to remove her motion?
That was done.
She already did. And Nisha removed hers. Thank you, Jeff, for the second.
Can I just make one more comment? I know it's not about this. It's just clearly as we go through this over the next few weeks, we do need to involve the school's administration to understand what projects can meet the criteria of ARP on terms of timing and execution, because I'm not sure we have that information, especially for the one project you want to put in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
You need my approval, which I grant.
Okay. So, Nisha,
Who made that motion?
can you call the vote?
Stephen. We are voting on.
Well, we are removing the sub-allocation in the CIP sheet,
Can
so.
we see if we can do it by unanimous?
Yeah. Are there any objections? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
Laura objects.
Sorry.
Okay, so let's call the vote.
Yes, Stephen.
I object to the whole process. I vote no.
Miriam.
Yes.
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 I'm a yes.
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 On second thought, I'm going to go with Laura and say no.
No.
9-3.
Dan.
Yes.
That's a 9-3.
Yes.
Okay.
Who are the no's besides Karen and myself?
Stephen.
Okay. The next items are stormwater and sewer. Are there any motions on stormwater and sewer? Okay, hearing none. Next item is related areas of focus, which is the Department of Human Services. I mean, just one thing I will note, I believe some people may have a hard stop. So I just wanted to see, maybe before we go to that, I just wanted to see if anybody wanted to make a motion on the, if we can just go out of order for a second. Anyone want to make a motion on the nonprofits?
Yes. I have 2 motions, one on the Department of Human Services and then on the nonprofits as well. You ready to accept that now? Does anyone need a break? Is that what you were asking?
Are you going to go down in order or on the?
Well, I mean, I was thinking, look, there
Negative
may
economic
be
impact?
some potential other motions, but I think the 401c3 was just, you know, there was really been a lot of discussion on that, and I just thought.
I'm confused as to where we are.
That's going to be Office of First Selectman, nonprofit organization impacted by the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
I mean, because those have been, you know, well advertised and discussed. I just wanted to, you know, put that out there first, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine.
So
Miriam,
Miriam, I think, has indicated she has the motion.
Yep,
Yes.
and second was?
So my first motion is to increase the Department of Human Services by a sum of $140,750 to a total of $1 million.
Where did it come from?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so part of that is an increase of the bank preschool aftercare pilot by $59,500 to a total of $229,000. The increase of the Department of Human Services client financial aid assistance by $50,000 to $200,000. Increase of the Commission on Aging Tech Connect by $31,250 to $125,000. Which I mentioned already, the total. The counterbalance, so that would be a total decrease from the Greenwich High School remediation project by that amount, $140,750.
$147.50.
$140,750.
Thank you. I second that.
I already did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So just quickly, rationale and discussion. So we've already discussed at length about the spirit of ARPA and how a number of us feel that it falls short on meeting its true spirit. The original amount to the Department of Human Services was just shy, which is just shy of $860,000, only 2.7% of the total Greenwich Town ARPA allocation of 31.4. The actual financial assistance portion as presented by the first selectman of $150,000 is only 48 basis points. That's less than half of 1% of the total pool, woefully inadequate in my opinion, and completely misses the mark on the spirit in which the funds were allocated. As I mentioned in our first read last week, when Mr. Brandon was before us, this board will often refer to Greenwich's Alice population, liability constrained.
Asset limited.
Yes, thank you.
Employed.
And thank you. Population, which combined with our residents at or below poverty level is about 30% of our total population as a key reason for our decisions. We have a chance to directly support this population with an additional small hand up in these unprecedented times for members of our community who are still truly hurting. These are folks who are still truly hurting. And while I wish we had allocated a great deal more, I will settle for a small increase to the amount initially indicated by the First Selectman's ARPA committee. In the grand scheme, the amount is small but has a real tangible direct effect on our neighbors, on our vulnerable neighbors. I hope all my colleagues on this board will agree.
Any additional discussion?
Sorry.
Jeff?
I mean, it was said in Miriam's remarks, but I want to just to reiterate that the numbers proposed by Miriam are the numbers that was originally proposed by the by the First Selectman, and were only reduced in the last 2 days before his list was finalized.
Okay. You know, I would note that, you know, again, I agree there was one proposal and then it was modified, but you know, when I look at these 4-year programs, I suppose what I'm really asking is we don't know where COVID is going to be next year, the year after, and certainly I think that, you know, when Ben presented, you know, his reason for reducing them somewhat is an appreciation of we don't really know what's going to be going on in 2026 and what the needs are. So I appreciate the motion, but I would not support that. You know, I had considered, you know, putting conditions on the last 2 years of these programs because we don't, not then reallocating the money anywhere else, but putting a condition on that we would, you know, in a year or a year and a half, we would review where COVID is, what's going on with the programs, and then potentially release the last 3-4 years. I don't know that, you know, we'll end up making that motion or not. But, you know, 4 years out or 3-4 years out is quite a ways. Thank you.
May I make a comment on that?
Of course.
Mr. Chair. So I understand that, and I think part of this is in the same ways that we've done with a number of the other items before us on ARPA, is I would actually collapse the dates. This is a minuscule amount. It's again, we are talking a tiny amount, 3%. Of this overall $31.4 million. And if we don't know what's going to happen in 3 years, and there's I even question the need for conditions. This is the spirit of ARPA. These are folks in our community that are still hurting. And I would give the sums, as I broke down into those 3 separate programs, give it all in one lump sum and have the department allocate it accordingly. Thank you.
Okay. Nisha, can you call the vote?
Stephen?
Yes.
Miriam?
Yes.
No.
Bill? Jeff?
Yes.
Leslie?
Yes.
Leslie Turkington?
No.
I'm a no. Mike?
No.
David Weisbrod?
Yes.
Karen?
No.
Laura?
Yes.
And Dan?
No?
6.
Okay. That
Can I make a
motion,
motion?
the motion fails.
Can I make a motion also on the Department of Human Services related areas of focus?
Yes.
And that is to combine the allocation of $859,250 into one allocation, and they have sub-accounts in these particular areas. That way, as the needs arise, they can have the ability to move funds from one project to another.
So Leslie, that's for the Department of Human Services?
Yes.
Within, so it would still have to be within those 5 programs, but they could
Yes.
move it around. It would
Yes.
not go to anything else.
Yes.
Can I ask?
Yes.
One is on the,
Does any of that money go through any other 501c3? I thought that some of them did.
well,
No?
they would have the,
I just want to understand what your motion is. I'm not.
right, so yes, if you read the specific accounts,
It seemed like some of them did. So
but they would be able to allocate more funds to behavioral health, for example, and maybe less to client assistance if that were the trends and the needs of the population. The other two, it's really those two that they have more control over. I think the funding for the Youth Services Bureau they talked about and justified. The Tech Connect is an independent program, as is Bank. But I want to, because they don't have the funding they deserve, I want to give them the flexibility at least to try to meet their needs.
I'm sorry, I'm a little dense, but so you're saying that we're not going to allocate within what's there? They can do whatever they want with the monies, and if some other program needs?
No, it's among those 5 accounts.
Okay.
They can move money from bank to Tech Connect or move money from
Got
Tech
it.
Connect to bank, but they can't move it to something else.
Thank you. I'm on pain medication, so.
So, may I ask something?
Yes.
So I would ask, will this create a precedent for the department's external entities that we would not like to have?
ARP is a unique entity. It's an opportunity to do things that the departments and the public needs. Be good to take advantage of that. I don't see it as setting a precedent.
And to clarify, this would be only amongst the 5. I think we should, certainly make that crystal clear. It would be amongst the 5 programs listed here.
It's in essence how we present it. It could be just like you presented it for HVAC. So the dollar amount towards this initiative is $859,250. It'll show sub-accounts as to the intent of the use of the funds, but it allows the department head to have some flexibility in addressing particular needs.
So your intent is that the sub-accounts would initially show this, but they could move amongst the sub-accounts?
Yes.
Correct. I don't have, I'm just speaking for myself with that understanding. I don't have an objection to Leslie's motion, but is there any other discussion? Any
Well,
other
again, I just want to be assured that they can't add another sub-account and that it would just be between these 5. Okay.
We can ask the budget director, are those protection, is that how it works when identifying the sub-account?
We could certainly do that. I do know that when You said the ARP money is different than when the department tried to move money around the external entity, and it was different than what they had originally put into the budget. They did run into some pushback on that.
So we have precedent that way.
So, I mean, I think I'm more comfortable with knowing where the monies are going, just because this is a different program. So Leslie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on where you might put those extra funds or where you might.
There aren't
I'm
any
sorry, just leave it as it is.
I would leave the proposal the way that they've
And I
provided
would,
the detail. It's
but-
just the management of the account.
Right,
If it's
and-
moved under one project number.
I don't know if I necessarily support that idea just on what I've heard from Roland. And I think it's going to be an auditing nightmare if we start doing that.
Peter or Roland, can you comment on that?
Audit's the same.
Well, I don't think it's an accounting issue at all. I mean, if they write a check to one of these five, they write a check to one of those five. There's no issue with that.
Does it make sense to, in that amendment, to clarify, just so that, for the avoidance of any doubt, that it would be amongst these 5 programs listed? Is that?
Well,
I don't think that's necessary.
Is that
The CIP sheet will reflect that. The CIP sheet will show the sub-accounts, will show the intent of the funding.
But just clarify for me, Roland, you had said that moving monies around could create some issues.
We just had an issue years ago on COVID, and everybody tried to balance off just a few of the larger external entities.
Okay.
That was an
They tried to use
RTM
the external entities to balance. There was 2 issues. Moving money around the external entities and balance the budget.
But that
So-
wasn't an accounting issue. That was an issue on the substance of how they made those budgets work, so.
Leslie?
So it seems to me that Leslie's request may be reasonable, but perhaps, it's unusual, but we could just have the department head for human services, someone can explain what we're doing here and giving them the additional flexibility, just make sure the understanding is within those same 5 accounts over the, and we could just do that maybe decision day or even the BET day, regular meeting, just to clarify, but it sounds, what Leslie's proposing sounds reasonable.
Laura?
I don't think we need to overcomplicate this. It's exactly what we're doing with BOE HVAC. We're just listing the projects and that the Department of Human Services would have flexibility to allocate amongst those 5 different programs. So it's my understanding that this is decision day for ARP. So if we want to move forward with this, I think this is, eminently reasonable. It gives them a little flexibility.
Okay. So with that, can I call the question? Nisha? Thank you.
Stephen?
Could we identify one more time exactly what we're voting on this time around?
We're taking the 5 accounts that are listed under DHS, and those CIP sheets we're looking at are all being merged into a single item, but the sheets still stand, but as one single item. And the pooled sum of $859,250 is being funded for those 5 items, but that creates the ability for them to move money as among those 5 items.
Thanks,
So
Jeff.
effectively sub-accounts.
As sub-accounts.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I
So,
go for the- yeah, I'll-
Stephen?
yeah.
Okay.
I was going to start on this side because I heard some chatter over here.
Start with Laura.
All right, I'll start with Laura. Laura?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Yes.
David? Mike?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Leslie Turkington? Leslie?
Yes.
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 Yes, I'm a yes.
All right.
And thank you for that motion, Leslie. I think that's helpful. I would just note that, I know there's frustration, but, that was an item that wasn't kind of previewed amongst the caucuses either. But again, I thank you for the motion. Sometimes those things happen. The next item is the Nonprofit 501c3s, allocation of $1,329,097.
I do have a motion on that. Are there questions?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I will mention, though, very quickly that I did ask Mr. Branyan last week about how he came up with the DHS numbers. So that was a very strong hint that I was going to make that motion. But nonetheless, for the nonprofits. So my motion is to increase the YWCA Greenwich Sexual Assault Services and Prevention Education Pilot Program by $150,000. The total to the nonprofits becomes $1,479,097. And to fund that, a reduction in the Greenwich High School remediation project by $150,000.
Second? Is there a second?
I second that.
I think Stephen might have gotten there first. Is that okay, Leslie? Okay.
First, I'd like to thank the Office of the First Selectman for the overall recent increase in the nonprofits and the ARPA allocation, which is why the removal of the YWCA Sexual Assault Pilot Program, an ask that was designated as a top importance by the First Selectman Scoring Committee, is a head-scratcher. Not only are nonprofits in the first criteria of ARPA, but domestic violence and sexual assault are explicitly stated in the document as areas of priority. And as we heard from Ms. Kieran yesterday, it's on page 4356 of the final Arp Act. The pandemic exacerbated the impact of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. We heard from numerous members of the YWCA Board and Domestic Violence Program last night about the limited resources to Greenwich residents and the fact that sexual violence often goes hand in hand with domestic violence, Greenwich's #1 violent crime. Let's send the message to our residents that we have a commitment to addressing sexual assault in a meaningful way. I hope to have everyone's commitment to add this $150,000 back to the ARPA full budget.
Thank you. Discussion? I believe Stephen and then Jeff.
We certainly heard from the community last night about the need for this. As Miriam has pointed out, this is specifically identified as a need for ARPA funding. I think the advocates on behalf of the YWCA made a powerful case last night, and I strongly believe we should add this funding back.
So I in the past have expressed not much enthusiasm for this item, but I'm going to vote in favor of it at this time. The critical difference for me is the fact that unlike the appropriations that we make at the external entities component of the Department of Human Services in the annual budget, that's a fixed pool, and the large sum going to the YW for the domestic abuse educational services is therefore a detraction from the 28 other nonprofits that are on the list, so that the YW is receiving a very major piece of that, and the others are sharing small pieces. In this particular case, this is no longer sums which are coming out of tax dollars and no longer in competition with the other nonprofits. It's additional funding, and although I'm not sure, was it expressed in the motion that this would be a deduction from the DHS remediation program? Okay, I think that was expressed. If it wasn't, it should be. That's a different application of funds, and so while I'm still not wildly enthusiastic about this application of funds, I am more aggrieved about how little proportion of these ARP funds are being applied to remediate the COVID impacts, and how much is being used to remediate mill rate on lavish households. And so I'm going to support this item.
Leslie?
I just wanted to add one point, that this change is consistent with the First Selectman's recommendations. The changes that were made between the Monday and the Wednesday last meeting of the advisory committee, both the Monday had the YWCA funding in it, and on Wednesday it had 2 other line items of funding. This motion keeps those 2 additional line items in, but also goes back to fund this program, which the committee that vetted all of the applications ranked at the highest level. And I think there was an email shared by Ms. Erickson that talked about the resources available to the victims of sexual assault if this is not started in town, and they're woefully inadequate.
Any other discussion? Nisha?
So, I just want to first say this vote is a very difficult one for me. As many of you might have known, I did serve on the board of the YWCA for 6+ years. And as a woman, I believe it's extremely important to fund domestic abuse programs. But I also believe our first selectman has a good understanding in the needs of our community and works closely with all these nonprofits. I think there were many nonprofits on here that I did not personally see. And I don't think it's really in the purview of this board to specifically discuss which nonprofit is more deserving than the other. However, we heard a lot of calls last night from many members of the board of the Y and from the CEO. So I did a little bit of research, and I did want to share it with the public. So 3 points. First, the YWCA is a well-funded organization with a very large endowment, nearly $12 million. Its balance sheet is $22 million. It has operating revenues of $9 million. In fiscal year 22, the organization netted around $5.5 million, $2.5 million of operating revenue, an additional $2 million of investment returns, and an additional $750 or so in PPP. Second, the YWCA had access to a lot of the COVID programs that many of our smaller nonprofits did not. The YWCA took about $1.5 million in the Paychecks PPP program and had a surplus in the last 2 years, while many organizations and nonprofits had a tough time surviving. Actually, they did so well that their CEO, obviously, is well paid. They're with a salary in excess of $300,000, and also at a bonus of about 20% of the last 2 years increase in bonus. Finally, the YWCA, in terms of programs, spends $6.4 million there's about $6.4 million of expenses, of which about $1.1 million is allocated towards domestic abuse. It's less than 15%. Some of the other programs include aquatics, fitness, and really one I really want to touch upon is policy advocacy. There is a lot of concern in our community that we have heard about the organization's political advocacy. Many people in town support these ideas, but there are many that also oppose it. I've heard confidentially from many members of the YWCA and many board members that the organization has advocated for transit-oriented or is planning on or has, or in some ways indirectly. I hope this is not true, but that they are advocating for transit-oriented development and for high-density development. Many issues that we spent our entire morning discussing that this town is unanimously against. I don't know if it's true, but I do know that the organization has utilized a lot of progressive advocacy in some of these funds. As far as actually funding for our domestic abuse programs, the Y, I believe, has enough funds to cover this. And why we should not support this amendment today is simply if it's the need, if we're talking about the need, I believe the organization has the funds it needs. So I hope I'm clear why I will not support this. And it's not because I don't believe that those needs don't exist. I do, as a matter of fact, I spent and I have, as an individual, supported the organization, not only in terms of my time and energy, but also in terms of my own personal money.
Laura?
I just want to clarify, the $150,000 that was recommended by the first selectman and the advisory committee up until March 17th is seed money. It's not going to cover the whole cost of the program by any means. There's absolutely every expectation that the YWCA will leverage the ARPA money, which is completely eligible for this purpose, to augment the program. My overall concern here is not with the financial health of the Y, because I'm sure we could go through many other of the nonprofits that are on the list and make judgments about whether or not they could use the money. And I'm certainly not going to respond to comments about hearsay amongst board members about confidential board matters. But what I will say is that there are victims of sexual abuse who do not seek treatment because it is not convenient. It is an underreported crime. It is a crime that is committed largely around young people, and it's just, I am shaking right now because it is such a need in our community that is not met. And this is $150,000 out of $34.1 million. And I think if you don't have any idea about what sexual abuse can do to a person or to a family, you're not going to get it. So I think we should probably vote on this. But I think what the advocate said last night is that this vote does send a clear signal from this board and to this community about our values. And I just am baffled why we can't get to yes on this particular issue. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to make one more point.
And again, I love how you debate. I would just, at some point, like to just have the last word.
I have the floor, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's not, again, I think we need to be honest about what's going on here. This is not a lack of funds that the organization has. It's a lack of prioritization. As I mentioned, they spend less than 20% of their actual operational expenses are spent towards this. They have absolutely excess funds. So I think if we are saying that there is a lack of dollars needed to pursue this program, that is absolutely being dishonest about what we are discussing. So we are not, as I can speak for myself, I am not against any of the proposed amendments or the proposed plans for domestic abuse, their programs, but I am absolutely saying it is not because of a lack of funding, it's a lack of prioritization on the organization's end to make those a priority for them.
So, yeah.
Okay, David?
So I'd just like to get the conversation back to the matter at hand. The COVID period was well documented as one where the instances of sexual assault mounted. We were all, isolated, and in certain circumstances, that isolation enhanced, if you want to use that word, but increased the exposure of people to sexual assault. That's the issue that is before us. We're not here to. It's not a moratorium on the YWCA per se. It's about which organization has come forth to provide the services that are needed in the community, which do not exist, for treating victims of sexual assault, which is a byproduct of COVID. And so I think the request, which was originally in the first selectman's submission, to restore it for the 150, and especially in light of the, I thought, persuasive testimony that we all heard yesterday, is very, very well supported. So I would support this motion wholeheartedly to increase by 150,000. Thank you.
Okay. Nisha, can you?
Just a quick comment. I don't think anybody on this board is burying their head in the sand and saying that domestic violence, and specifically sexual assault, does not exist in this town. We all know that it does. The question is, does an entity that already has a lot of funding and does not utilize their funding basically to address this need 150,000 of ARP money that could be used for other purposes? And I will be voting no for this addition.
Thank you, Nisha. Can you call the vote?
Stephen? I'm sorry, I didn't
That's
hear
yes.
you.
Yes, that's
Yes.
a yes. I'm sorry, that's a yes.
Okay, Marianne?
Yes.
No. Yes.
Yes.
No.
I'm a no.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I'm a no.
It's 6-6.
That motion fails. The last item is, I'm sorry, the next item is Public Health Education Specialist. I'm sorry, the next item is Public Health Education Specialist. Are there any amendments? Hearing none, we'll go to the next.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can we take a 5-minute break? We've been going for 2.5 hours since our last break, even if it's for 5 minutes. Is that reasonable?
Yep.
I mean,
is that okay?
Yeah, I think if people have a problem, they should.
Okay. Are there any amendments to the Greenwich High School remediation? And
I think he's reasoning that we might be an inch away from being done. Is that what you're?
I think so, but all I would just say is if you want to take a break before the final vote to approve this, that's understandable, but I just want to just see if, do we think there's going to be a motion on the Greenwich High School remediation project? I think no, right? Okay, so you'd like to take a break, okay.
I wasn't sure if we were going back to to stormwater and sewer or anything.
No, we
so-
already went through those. Those are done.
Okay, I didn't know if we were coming back to
that's
those. I
done.
thought you were leapfrogging to
So,
DPW.
yeah, so unless there's any amendments on the last two, we're here to vote on the item as amended, which would be the final vote. Miriam, is that?
That's fine.
Okay,
That's
great.
fine,
Okay,
if that's,
yeah.
if the
Okay.
last thing we have to
Yes.
do.
I heard no motions on the GHS remediation or on the administrative and auditing compliance. So now we have the amended item in front of us. Any discussion before the vote?
I just want to make it clear, sorry if I'm being
Of course,
recognized.
Liz.
I'm going to vote no. I am appalled at some of the discussion and the decision that this board had and the last-minute motions and the lack of transparency. And while this is great funding for the community, and I was really excited at the start, this is not just a methodology or an outcome that I can support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Nisha, can you call the vote on the item as amended?
Okay. Laura?
No.
Karen?
Yes.
Jada?
No.
Mike?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Leslie Turkington?
Yes.
No.
Mark?
Yes. Yes.
Abstain.
No.
Okay, and I'm a yes.
So I think I have 741.
Can I move to adjourn?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any objections? Thank you.